Hello and welcome to the Kongversation. I'm Hyle Russell.
And I'm Josh Wallen.
And welcome back to the show, Josh. It's a special occasion when you're here, or it must mean it's a special occasion when you're here, because I save you for important topics.
Well, I appreciate that, and it is indeed a special occasion, because we're here to talk about the death of optimism in the Donkey Kong universe. I mean, it makes me pine for the glory days of the mid-2000s. Like, I know some fake fans hated games like Donkey Konga, Donkey Konga 2, but at least they were still trying back then, you know?
They were actually releasing Donkey Kong games. Now, you're in a bongo kick lately, I see from your media on the social.
Yeah, I picked up the full boxed with the bongos, like, edition of Donkey Kong Jungle Beat a few weeks ago. I was like, that's it. Not to go off on too much of a tangent right here at the start of the episode, although it is perfectly in character for us, but you know, that game, I originally, it's funny, despite having Donkey Konga, okay, I had Donkey Konga, I had the bongos already, and I just completely ignored Jungle Beat because I was like, well, DK Vine hates it, so I mean, it must suck, right?
Yeah. That was, well, I'm sure we'll be touching a little bit on Jungle Beat over the course of this episode, because it is relevant.
That may be more relevant than we think.
Yeah, basically, you're here, this is kind of a follow-up to the episode we did back in the spring. The infamous Heard Any Good Rumors Lately episode. And this is kind of addressing a little bit of the fallout from that, and what we have learned, and what has been officially announced since then. So, it's basically a realignment episode, right? And I needed to get you back on here to have this proper realignment. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to raise some spirits on this episode.
We're gonna relentlessly dunk on people who we think are being too cynical.
No, not at all, because
No?
I empathize and sympathize with them.
Yes, of course.
Because I was there once too. It's basically the story of the person who falls in the hole, and it's like, I need help getting out of the hole, and the person who helps him get out of the hole says, I was down in that hole once too, and I know the way out. Aaron Sorkin tells that story much better on The West Wing, but you have to just trust me. It's very profound when you hear it. And it's not coming from a stammering mess on a Donkey Kong podcast. Before we get started, I do want to give the both of us some time for some due diligence, because we got to plug our wares, our rare wares. Well, in my case, rare wares. Yours are usually Sega wares, but
more often than not lately, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's kind of where your bread and butter. You're more of a general gaming channel than I am. When I say channel, I mean your YouTube channel. I'm more stretched out, but I don't focus on YouTube. But you're more general gaming, but you still have your obvious core fandom, which I always attribute to Sonic the Hedgehog. So, you know, it is what it is. But real quick, on my end, I want to plug that the Kongversation is now on Spotify, which might not mean much if you're listening to this, but if you usually pull it up on like YouTube, I mean, some people do, so that's some people's preferred way to listen to it. But, you know, by and large, most people find us on a podcast network, Apple Podcasts, or all the derivatives of that. But if you prefer to listen to podcasts on Spotify, and I know that's a growing number of people, we're now on Spotify. It took a while to get on there because, long story short, it didn't like our XML code, and we had to figure out what was keeping Spotify from reading it. It was something really, really stupid, and honestly, it was Spotify's fault, not ours. But we got it sorted out. We're on Spotify now. Thanks to the Matt Corna and Mitchell Wolf and the team of technicians that it took to figure out why the code was not being read, but we did it. And yeah, so if you want to listen to us on Spotify now, you have the opportunity. Hoping to grow our audience there. If this is your first time listening to the Kongversation, because you're a down and out Donkey Kong fan who heard this episode would lift your spirits, welcome. Great to have you. Hopefully we can do it for you. But Josh, talk to us really quick about the Geek Critique and any recent videos you might want to plug.
Oh, okay. The Geek Critique is, I mean, general gaming, man. Like that's that at this point I feel like is just such a wide covers such a wide base that I think more than anything, what I focus on tends to be just properties. Increasingly seems to be things that like were popular in like the 90s, unfortunately.
Yeah,
for better and worse, I guess.
You get up to the mid-aughts, though. I mean, you stretch your limbs a bit.
Yeah, and like, you were just talking about Spotify. I'm like, well, I've always subscribed to the Kongversation via the RSS feed because I learned because I'm just technologically perpetually stuck in about 2005.
Yeah. I try not to be, but when you're busy, like I'm so busy with DK Vine and life in general and trying to find that balance, I want to be a working gal that has it all, right? Just like those cigarette commercials in the 1990s promised. But, they don't keep the world standing still for you. And sometimes you blink and you look up and you're like, oh, I'm supposed to be using this now. I'm supposed, wait, my earbuds are now supposed to be earpods? Since when? I'm fine with the ones I use.
Why wouldn't I just buy individual music tracks on Amazon Music? I don't know what Spotify is.
Yeah. I still like having ownership, even if it's of digital files. I don't want to.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I still have a massive CD collection because I feel like, well, at least then I can make digital copies of it, but I still have the artwork and I can thumb through the book and have a nice box set or something. So.
Well, anyway, to plug my newest video, the last thing I did was, Sonic Jam, which came out just about a week ago. And,
Sonic Jam, yeah. That was from the, what was it, 1996?
97. That was
97.
That was the one Sonic game that Sonic Team made for the Sega Saturn, and it was a compilation, a very loving, very reverent, compilation of the first 4 games on the Genesis, which is funny to think about that they're doing this, nostalgia museum compilation for a series that was, at that time, only 6 years old.
Yeah.
That'd be like, let's look back on the incredible legacy of Splatoon.
I mean, that would be like when Donkey Kong Country came out in the Game Boy Color, and that was only 6 years removed from it being on Super Nintendo, and it was just like, well, why? I can just play this on my Super Nintendo. This doesn't make any sense. Why didn't they just make a new game?
Yeah, I think Nintendo fans through the GameCube and GBA generation, we had people kept complaining about re-releases and the lack of new games. They just keep re-releasing this old stuff. But, nobody was taking any account into the fact that, like we've talked about many times before, those GBA DKC games meant that, kids of the 2000s, had a lot of very similar formative gaming memories as we did.
Yeah.
They were so much more important than, we were giving them credit for back then, just cause, we were very myopic fans.
Unless you were a Diddy Kong Racing fan.
That's true. Yeah, isn't it conspicuous how, you hear people say, oh man, I grew up with DKC on the GBA. You never hear anybody talk about Diddy Kong Racing DS.
No, as it should be.
Yeah,
as much as I like aspects of that game, it's sort of it's more of an intellectual rather than a visceral, oh, I love that. It is what it is. We have a lot to discuss, Josh,
yes,
on this episode. And knowing us, we're going to be long-winded about it. So,
knowing us.
We're going to stop the due diligence because I could plug our various Patreons or whatever else we have in the oven right now. What tasty treats we're baking up. But I'm not going to do that because I want to tell you a little story. It's story time with Hyle. So sit down.
All right.
It's a story about something that was absolutely huge in popular culture for a brief spell in the 1990s, into the early aughts. It captured...
Finally, I've been waiting for the Sex and the City conversation. Let's do it.
This is something that captured mainstream attention, and while certain purist snobs like to turn their nose up at it, it was undeniably catching on with audiences who didn't normally go for that sort of thing, but they really liked what was being offered here. And it felt like its popularity would never end, all until a large corporate buyout killed the momentum dead. And there would be flashes of a resurgence from time to time throughout the years, but it would always peter out. It would always be anticlimactic, disappointing the loyal fans who just wanted things to go back to the way they were in the 90s. And I'm, of course, referring to the art of professional wrestling. Now,
it always comes back to this, doesn't it?
I don't know if I've done this opening with you before, but if I have, that we really are just locked in a cycle of time. But
I don't recognize this opening. I'm just like, of course it's wrestling. It was going to be either that or Power Rangers, you know?
Yeah, well, yeah.
The Disney buyout.
So listen, pro wrestling, it saw unparalleled success, of course, in the 1990s with WCW's NWO storyline and things like Sting and Goldberg and, what have you, and the WWF's Attitude Era with Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock. I don't need to explain it to anybody. You've all heard the names, but.
And Diamond Dallas Page. People are always like, WCW never made any stars. They just no, fuck you. DDP.
Yeah. And Diamond Dallas Page. Apologies. So.
Thank you.
After WCW was bought out by the WWF, in 2001, about a year and a half before another buyout, which hopefully there's some misdirection there. The WWF bought out WCW and they're now WWE, but the wrestling boom kind of quickly cooled down actually. And then we're stuck with this kind of monopoly and this stagnation of it as an art form. And there would, like I said, occasionally be exciting glimpses of like recapturing the magic. Cause it's interesting wrestling, right? It's interesting, Josh, because you wouldn't think I would be somebody who would be kind of taken in by it, but I find it absolutely enthralling as a concept that sports aren't exciting for me because I feel like it's all just a bunch of stats and it's all very arbitrary. It's like math for jocks, right? Mm-hmm. But with wrestling, if you predetermine the outcome, you can just do all sorts of crazy shit. You can add lore, storylines, pathos, mythology. It can just be off the rails. And indeed, that's when wrestling is its most exciting, is when it feels like a legitimate sporting event that is actually going off the rails. Like, oh no. Like imagine if you're watching, say, the NFL, NIFL. And all of a sudden gang warfare broke out on the field. You're like, what the fuck is happening? Oh my God. That guy just got stabbed. That guy just got thrown through, the goalpost, like that is insane.
Yeah, the team that the home team beat in a close one last week comes back. They all come back and they just interrupt the game and wreck the stadium.
Yeah. or like a team member takes the ball and then all of a sudden starts running in the opposite direction and puts it in the opposing team's field. What is it? Touchdown zone? I don't know.
the end zone, I believe.
End zone. Okay. And then they rip out off their jersey and they have the other team's jersey and they're like, that's the kind of crazy shit that you can do in wrestling. If you just determine the outcome and don't have any of this legitimate competition, it's fantastic. But so that's what it's always intrigued me. I was like, if you were a creative sort who had control of a wrestling promotion, I think that would be one of the most fun writing jobs in the absolute universe, right? So, I've always kind of had a interest. I haven't been interested in it much in the last 20 years, aside from a couple flourishes here or there. I'd hear about this CM Punk guy, right? And I'd be like, oh, that sounds cool. What he's doing. I want to check that out. And it ultimately goes nowhere, but you were still intrigued for that brief moment.
Oh, but man, it should have.
But I bring all of this up because despite the trajectory wrestling went on, there's now hope again for lapsed wrestling fans with the newish company promotion, All Elite Wrestling, AEW. And it's, getting all these headlines. It's getting all of this attention, pulling in all of these viewers that haven't watched it in years because it's kind of doing all the things that the fans had wanted for so long, who weren't really taken in by Vince McMahon's product. So I just find it interesting that this is happening right around the same time that we're hearing all of these rumblings for another lost 90s child in Donkey Kong and Donkey Kong Country. Because right around the same time that wrestling collapsed, Rare was bought by Microsoft. And while things continued for Donkey Kong, it felt like there was no longer any direction. It felt like it was kind of aimless. And all of the momentum that had built up from 94 to roughly 99 was kind of lost. And even when we had those resurgences, those flashes of hope, Donkey Kong Country Returns, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, they ultimately didn't really lead anywhere. And now we're in this position where we've got our own All Elite Wrestling for Donkey Kong. And it's exciting. And that is, of course, everything that's happening behind the scenes that we've reported on the Conversation and talked about on DK Vine. So, Josh, when you were last on this podcast, we discussed the big rumor that has been given to me by my sources, who I trust implicitly, that Nintendo EPD is working on a Donkey Kong game, right? And this is something we've been talking about for a couple of years on the Conversation, but whereas we kind of broke the story via the Conversation, it still went under the radar in mainstream sources until some high-profile leakers started talking about it in the run-up to this last E3. And then it became this huge thing. And honestly, like, DK Vine's involvement in the story probably wouldn't have been known had some of our faithful listeners actually, like, written in to some of these sites and said, hey, DK Vine had the story first. And then it kind of snowballed from there. And thank you for going to bat for us. I mean, that always feels great, but it definitely triggered a lot of anxiety on my end at that point, because I shared my concern about it on the episode we did. What happens, and ultimately what did happen, if the game wasn't revealed at E3? Because I didn't think it was going to be announced at this past E3. I never really thought it was. But you get these leakers, you get these rumors, you get these news stories going a month before E3, then that's all anybody's going to be focused on. That is going to be the story, is Nintendo's working on a new Donkey Kong game. What's the date? Oh, we're a month out from E3. Yeah, it's definitely going to be announced then. And if it isn't, then this story isn't true.
Yeah, and that kind of thing can make, like, disappointment so much more palpable. Like, a relevant example that I remember is, like, in the build-up to E3 2013, like, I didn't even care about getting a new Metroid game at that point. I wasn't a fan of Metroid yet. But just I had just gleaned from, like, sheer Nintendo osmosis that it, like, the feeling in the air was that Retro must surely be working on a new Metroid game. Yeah. And that feeling was so strong that when it was revealed that they weren't, like, you know, obviously Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze's initial reception, like, it got a lot of blowback just for not being that.
Oh, they removed the blowback from Tropical Freeze. Miyamoto wasn't there to tell them to put it in. Bam! As Don Dallas Cage would say.
I did not know where you were going with that. That was good. Ooh.
Yeah. I think raised expectations of it. Because there's one thing if DK Vine's talking about, if you're listening to it on the Conversation, you hear this. because honestly, Josh, I say a lot more than I'm supposed to sometimes on this show. Some things I've been made privy to, I'll just let kind of slip out from time to time. And I won't treat it like a big deal and kind of completely goes under the radar. With this, I've been more upfront about it. It's like, hey, this is what I'm hearing. Big build up. Let me be dramatic about it. But still, I don't write big news stories. I don't go to the major gaming forums and be like, this is what I hear. I am Hyle. I am a leaker.
I don't make a bunch of clickbaity YouTube videos about it.
No, I just focus on my product, and if people can glean anything from it, then, go ahead. But, that's not my game. That's just too anxiety inducing, as I said, because then everybody's gonna like call you a fraud if something doesn't immediately come true. And I'm also like not about like spoiling things. Like I think like saying that, hey, they're working on a Donkey Kong game isn't spoiling things because people need that hope. People need something to hang on to. But, if I'm made aware of this like big cool thing that maybe like Platonic's working on or Rare's working on, I don't want to come out and say like, hey, they're doing this. Ha ha ha. Beat them to the punch. So anyway,
and that's kind of like an interesting facet of, I guess, being, I don't want to say on the inside, but like
Lord,
being privy to like video game rumors, is that in my experience, because we've both heard about things, we both like known things before they've happened before, but like so much of what you get, and the way that these like mainstream leakers, quote unquote mainstream leakers, but the way that they talk about things really strikes me as like, so often what you'll hear in a situation like this is like just these very basic, like a very basic outline of what the plan is.
Yeah.
Like, and it seems like a lot of what they do is they take what they hear and they extrapolate like out of that. And they make like logical inferences based on, but it always just kind of strikes me as like, I don't know if the right term is conspiratorial thinking, where you're like, you have a conclusion and you're using this evidence to reach that conclusion, and it's logically sound and it makes sense, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily true.
Yeah. And I think that's a large part of how the game is played. It's kind of like psychic reading, like cold reading, where you kind of piece together the dots of somebody's life, and it makes it seem like you're psychic, but you're not really. And some leakers, I'm sure, actually get real information. I'm not saying that people don't. It's just because if we're getting it, other people are getting. It's one of those things where there are totally valid people with sources. And then there are people who are just bullshit artists, but you can't really determine if you're on the outside who is who.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't like.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's not that it's not real. It's that all you really like. You know that something is happening. You have this maybe one or two little pieces of information, but you don't know when it's happening. You don't know what it's going to look like. You don't know like in what form it'll take.
Yeah.
And I'm being vague here on purpose, but
Yeah. But anyway, E3 came and went, and we didn't get the announcement. And they specifically said at the end of that direct, we're working on other games that we're not ready to show off. But it was basically like the rest of the day then of that Tuesday was basically me getting hate messages.
It sucks so hard. It's not your fault.
Right. But that I knew that was going to come too, and unfortunately, when you put yourself out there like that, you kind of have to brace yourself for that. And so I wasn't really like upset about it. I'm not so delicate that I can't handle. I mean, I'm pretty delicate. Don't get me wrong. I'm a mess, but as far as that aspect of the job goes, I'm kind of prepared for it. But it was what I didn't want. And it wasn't so much me getting the hate. It was the mood it put the fandom in. And because I didn't want them plunged into this sense of pessimism or this sense of doubt that this was happening. But ultimately that's what happened. And then to make matters even worse, Josh, we hit Donkey Kong's 40th anniversary in July, and I'm very proud of what DK Vine did for it. We had the big Kongversation. It was a big celebratory podcast. We had special appearances from many of the creators who contributed to the legacy over the years. I mean, it was really cool. But none of the Nintendo Twitter accounts tweeted anything about Donkey Kong that day or that week or that month or that summer. Then when it was Metroid's 35th anniversary, they did tweet about it. And you brought up Metroid and Retro Studios and the history between Metroid and the Donkey Kong fandom. And so when Donkey Kong's 40th anniversary gets ignored by social media accounts run by Nintendo employees, and Metroid's 35th anniversary doesn't get ignored, drama ensues. Believe it or not, that is a very volatile equation right there. And lo and behold, the Donkey Kong community was plunged into a darkness I have not seen since 2009, Josh. It was bad.
Man.
And, you know, I am an upbeat guy. I mean, no, let me take that back. I am bipolar, and I suffer from crippling bouts of depression. Why? Just this week alone, I was rocked off my ass with bouts of self-loathing. I'm not gonna lie. I might have had a little bit too much to drink last night. I'm fine. It happens. And then I'll find a manic upswing, and I'll be like Kanye Light, and it'll be fantastic. I will be just off my ass with manic energy. I'm looking forward to that. I haven't had that since 2019, by the way. I miss it.
Geez.
I miss it so much. Anyway, where I'm going with this, though, is that I try to be upbeat, mostly because of the way my brain chemistry is wired. You know, I'm generally, I find that it's not good to wallow in cynicism, because it ultimately is not productive, both for your own health and for the health of others. And that is a lesson that I learned the hard way. You know, in my 20s, I was the most cynical, pessimistic person alive, right? I was miserable. It was just funny because I think at my heart, I'm an optimist, but I was just hard on myself. I was hard on everything I loved. And it ultimately, you know, led me to therapy and to reevaluate how I perceive things. And so with the new era of DK Vine that was ushered in, it took me a while to kind of find my voice in it, that voice in something that had been around when I was at my most miserable, but I eventually got there. And so despite me being Mr. Positive, it kind of got harder as the summer wore on to be positive in the face of the unrelenting pessimism, because this sort of dormant feud between Metroid fans and Donkey Kong fans, it's also stupid. It's stupid, but it exists. It's out there. And
it's interesting too, because like, basically we're in like the exact opposite situation now relative to those two fandoms that we were in like in 2013.
Mm-hmm.
Because like, you know, I love both of those franchises. Like, and when I hear stuff like this, it's like, well, of course they're going to acknowledge Metroid because Metroid Dread's coming out in just a few days.
Yeah.
So like, you know, they've got an announced game to promote. So like, of course they're going to take the opportunity to make a big deal about it.
And I brought this up too before, that very point I have brought up. Mm-hmm. It's like Nintendo's social media accounts, by and large, are there to promote the next product. They are not so much, let us embrace the legacy of Nintendo, the glorious history that is the Big N. Let us open up the vaults and let it spill out into your social media feeds.
Happy 25th anniversary to Ken Griffey Jr.
But that's the way it should be. I do agree. I think Nintendo is with all due respect for the people who work for it and work under very strict mandates, because that's what they are. It's not the people who work for their social media accounts' fault. It is the hierarchy's fault. And every studio, every company has certain levels of control they could do. I think the most like off the chain I've seen is Platonic's social media accounts at times. As far as like freedom to tweet whatever they want, but it's an indie studio, right? In relation to DK Vine, they have the most freedom. Nintendo has the least amount of freedom, and it's all in service of what they have to sell at that particular moment. So while I agree that it should be more all-encompassing, it's not. And we can't be so upset that it just so happened that Metroid's game is getting out the door this year and Donkey Kong's isn't ready to show off. Anyway,
and like, I guess the first point I want to make is that, like, you say you're seeing these levels of cynicism and these levels of direness that you haven't seen since 2009. And like, my initial reaction to that, because like you said, you've been through this, and that's sort of maybe the core point of this whole episode, is that like, we've been through this.
Yeah, we've
been here before. So like, I would imagine that the majority of the cynicism and the like, for lack of a better term, the doomers that are making this kind of noise are probably just haven't been through that yet. And like, they don't have any like personal recollection of like what the buyout era was like for DK fans on the internet at that time.
That's a solid point. I forget how old I am at times, which is funny because that's really the topic I'm about to bring up. But my experience with the Donkey Kong Country fandom, right? I've been there from the start. I co-launched DK Vine, co-founded it. So it's kind of this thing where I just assume that the grand narrative that is Donkey Kong Country and the shared universe that kind of sprang out for it is just something we all know, and we've all been through the ups and downs together. Then that applies as the years go by to fewer and fewer people.
Yeah.
As more Donkey Kong fans are made, sure, but as others kind of drift away or have drifted away, there's still long timers out there, and I'm thankful for all of you. But I am the old man of the community now. I am the cranky Kong, except I'm trying not to be cranky. I'm trying to be sort of the Payon era cranky, where I'm surprisingly helpful and I don't have many bad things to say. So I say all this, right? Because I am somebody who tries to base their whole fan persona and me being the ambassador of online Donkey Kong fandom. I say all that as somebody who tries to keep their heads above the clouds, but still can feel blue from time to time because it's taxing. It wears down on you to constantly be this upbeat person. And knowing what I know, I have no reason not to be upbeat, but just kind of the collective, I said ennui, both in a tweet about this and on the last episode I did with Malik. I said it was just this sense of ennui. And that's kind of the best way to describe it. Also, it's a French word, and feelings of sadness and Donkey Kong, I often associate with the French. Full of them tonight. What really, I think, set me on a blue bear path was ironically when I was first breaking down the concept for this episode. I had contacted you and I was like, Josh, I want to do a conversation that's kind of a follow-up to what we talked about last spring, kind of reflective of where we are as a fan base now. And, I always pick my co-hosts for these podcasts sort of like what topic is most tailor-made for a particular person in our community, or as part of the DK Vine staff, or just a close friend of mine. And for you, it's always episodes that kind of touch upon fandom in general and sort of the generational highs and lows that come with being a fan of a property. And so I think you would be the natural pick, even if you weren't on that episode last spring, but it was always going to be you. So I pitched this
because we've both been on the internet for like, geez, in my case, like 27 years at this point.
Yeah.
I think you're pretty close to that. too. But like more importantly than just how long we've been on the internet, we've been involved in fandoms for literal decades at this point, and we've kind of seen these cycles play out several times now.
Yeah, kind of becomes old hat after a while, and you just want to get out in front of it and say, no, this is the way it goes. Trust me.
Yeah.
But all the same, when I was breaking down the concept for this episode, they had announced the Nintendo Direct. And the September Nintendo Direct that we talked about on the last episode, Malik and I talked about on the last episode. And, you know, I said there why the whole Nintendo Direct cycle is exhausting for me. But what's really, I think, relevant to this topic is why this particular Nintendo Direct announcement kind of hit me right between the eyes. It set off all of these trending tweets, right, of the games that people wanted to see at this Nintendo Direct. And of course, it's Super Mario Odyssey 2, right? It's all of these games that weren't Donkey Kong. People have already written off this Donkey Kong EPD game as something that's not happening. It was a fake rumor from the spring. It's been deconfirmed because it didn't show up. But they can continually, you know, pull things like Odyssey 2 out of the mothballs, right? Because that's definitely going to happen. Oh, they're not doing Donkey Kong because that would have been announced at E3. So obviously Nintendo EPD hasn't branched off into a new team. They're doing Odyssey 2. There is no Donkey Kong game. Nintendo fandom is weird, Josh, because I tend to notice that they always focus on things that they have already been. Right? There was a Super Mario Odyssey game on a Switch, so obviously there's going to be a sequel. They can never like think about what hasn't Nintendo done in a while. What property is next up in line? Right?
Which is actually strange for Mario, especially because like how many like mainline Mario games get direct sequels on the same platform?
Galaxy?
Like, I know Galaxy did, but there's not very many.
Galaxy ruined everything, man. When Galaxy got a sequel, it put the notion in people's heads. And so everybody who's predictive about this stuff, but has no inside knowledge or even follows the trends, people who don't really connect the dots about what's happening, right? They just know, well, Galaxy got a sequel. That came out pretty early in the system's lifespan. Obviously, Odyssey is going to get a sequel. And look, Odyssey might get a sequel. I don't know. It won't affect the Donkey Kong game at all. Anyway, so I was just looking at all these trending topics about what Nintendo Twitter was getting hot and bothered about. And I felt so old, Josh. I felt like a man out of time. And I did something I shouldn't have done. I went to the Internet Archive in the Wayback Machine, and I looked at Nintendo's website from the year 2000. I actually was looking for late 1999, but instead pulled up like very early 2000. And what I saw really depressed me because I saw my Nintendo. The Nintendo that's long gone. The Nintendo that's kind of been forgotten about. And I felt old. I felt older than dirt.
We are so similar in this regard because because like seeing like you tweeted about this.
Yeah, I did.
And it made me feel the same way. And you know, you're describing the process of how you got there, and like I do the same things. I'm like, man, I don't feel like Twitter is particularly representative of me or my interests or my opinions. Let's just go like look at what TV Tropes said about this in like 2011. There we go. That's more like it.
And look, this isn't me being like, oh, the world was so much better in the late 90s, early aughts. In a lot of ways, we're a lot more forward thinking, a lot more loving, a lot more empathetic, as like a general core society thing. Yes, there's extremism, that's been heightened. Yes, the world is a scary place, much more scary overall than it was in the 90s, but
on the bright side, the Man Show isn't on anymore.
All I'm saying is it's a matter of perspective, right? But I think when I'm feeling like this, it's me kind of, in one part, mourning not being a kid again, right? Like not being a kid anymore, and the simplicity that was involved there. But it's also just, I'm passionate about this stuff, I want to say I am a Nintendo fan. And I don't want to put an asterisk next to that and say I'm a Nintendo fan. But what I really mean is I'm a Donkey Kong fan. But what I mean by that is I'm a Rare Donkey Kong fan. So I guess I'm really more of a Rare fan. Now, they're with Xbox now, and that's fine. But let me just explain to you the Donkey Kong universe and what that entails. It's tiring. But when I was looking at this website, I could have just said I was a Nintendo fan then, and it would have been perfectly applicable because there was like Diddy Kong Racing's Crunch, very prominent as one of the main character icons. There was Donkey Kong and Diddy Kong in his Diddy Kong Racing plane, and everything that I love and hold dear that's been forgotten about in the last 20 years.
Not only you could have, you did, but because I remember early DK Vine talking about, Sega's coming out with this Dreamcast. That might be okay, but it can't compete with the power of Nintendo.
Yeah. I was a full-on Nintendo zealot, dude. Like, exactly. It seems funny to say now, considering I feel like I've been pushed out of that fandom because I don't know. It feels like that my era of Nintendo, and I guess your era of Nintendo, is irrelevant to the overall discussion, to the conversation that is Nintendo. Not Kongversation, noted. It just conversation, because my era of Nintendo, mid 90s to early aughts, like late SNES through Nintendo 64, it almost feels counterfeit, not authentic to what came before and what came after, which is something we've talked about before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess maybe we should say what was actually on this website from what was early 2000, because yeah, I saw the same thing and it made me feel very similarly. This sort of like this sort of realization, in my case, not just of like what was, but how fast it changed after that.
It's like a blink of an eye, yeah.
Because what you've got on this website is like, it's just, it's a very late 90s, early 2000s web design, but like, I think I remember Banjo and Kazooie on the Nintendo logo.
Yeah.
Like they were they were held up on that regard as being on that level of like a Nintendo mascot. And then, like, all the buttons were decorated with various Nintendo characters, and you had, I believe, like, Diddy Kong, right there alongside, like, Fox and Yoshi.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know, like, it's frustrating, too, because the buyout and so much of the politics around that, it was a direct result of all of the management changes at Nintendo at the time, right? And it feels kind of icky to bring up that it was Iwata who took over around that time, because it feels like I'm blaming him, and I'm not. I respect Iwata so much. I would never speak ill of him, but Iwata became president. Howard Lincoln left Nintendo of America, and even like people like Ken Lobb, who were big Rare advocates in Nintendo of America, left for Microsoft, which is kind of how they got the wheels greased, ultimately for the buyout, when Rare went to Nintendo and said, hey, could you buy us? Could you just buy us outright? And Nintendo said no.
Yeah, like I was talking to a fellow YouTuber, Exo Paradigm Gamer, about this, who's about seven years younger than me. He grew up with a GameCube. And we were just kind of discussing this sort of like, to me, like growing up as a late, just like you said, a late era SNES/N64 kid, Rare was like inseparably part of why I liked Nintendo's consoles.
Yeah.
Like, you cannot, like, trying to imagine, I think a long time ago, one of the first episodes I was on was that Super Nintendo mini episode, and we discussed like a hypothetical N64 mini. And we said it back then, and it's true now. Can I just say, trying really to quick, imagine an N64 without Rare is just like impossible.
Can I just say really quick that speaking to what I know, it was bandied about at one time. Definitely hypothetical, ultimately in reality, but it was being bandied about in Nintendo, and for whatever reason, they decided not to do it. So,
well.
be that what it may. But, yeah. Yeah, it is like a whole defining era of my childhood into my teens, into young adulthood. It was just kind of rendered non-canon by what is Nintendo, right? By the tastemakers. And so you've got the NES era, the early Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64 only has highlights like, oh yeah, there's Super Mario 64 and the Zeldas. You know,
Yeah.
and then other stuff happened. We won't really dwell on that. And then the GameCube, and it, you know, it is what it is. We've talked about the generational shift before, but you know,
yeah. So like to me, I always felt there was this like phantom pain, not Metal Gear Solid 5, the phantom pain, but there was this phantom pain with the GameCube because like before it came out and before, really even after it came out, I used to look at the back of the box and look at that render of Donkey Kong Racing and think about all the great sequels to my favorite N64 games that were inevitably going to come out on this.
Yeah.
So it always just felt like something was missing with the GameCube. Compound that with the fact that during that time, Nintendo was taking this approach where like, it's one of those things where you can either be better than or different than, and they were consistently choosing to be different than. Super Mario Sunshine was not trying to be better than Mario 64, it was trying to be different.
Sure.
Same thing with stuff like the Wind Waker, same thing with like Jungle Beat in comparison to DK64 and the classic trilogy. So it always just felt like in the span of like just a couple of years, everything changed for Nintendo. And whereas to like somebody like Exo Paradigm Gamer who grew up with the GameCube, that was just the way it was. That was just the way it always was.
Yeah.
Like that stuff was as formative to him as, you know, Super Mario 64, Mario Kart 64, Donkey Kong Country. That was Nintendo to me. Whereas Mario Sunshine, Luigi's Mansion, I don't know, Chibi Robo, you know, that was Nintendo to him.
I mean, it's wild because it wasn't just Nintendo. It felt like everything changed around that time. I mentioned wrestling as the kind of parallel example of what was happening. But I mean, not to get too dark too quickly here, but 9/11 happened right around the same time. All of this was changing. And that really was like the end of the 90s right there, because there's always that bleed through. You know, an early part of the decade is basically a continuation of the previous decade. The early 90s were the 80s extended, just as the early 80s were essentially the late 70s. 9/11 marked the end of the 1990s. And then after that, it was just nothing was the same culturally or what was in the zeitgeist. And then it was made even more weird by me because that is when I kind of reached adulthood, or what society defines as adulthood. Obviously, your brain is still maturing into your mid-20s. You know, you're not really an adult, and we know that now until you hit, you know, a certain age, which is why the mid-20s is probably the most volatile time for your brain. So all of my friends went through the mid-20s kind of crisis. That is like, oh my God, I feel like there's a storm going on in my brain. What's happening? Oh, everything's terrible. But yeah, it was just, it felt like my childhood was being ripped from me in every conceivable way, and Rare being bought by Microsoft. I should rephrase that. Nintendo not buying Rare and then them going with Microsoft, because that is actually the correct way of thinking about it. Again, they would have been fine staying with Nintendo. It was Nintendo who ended that relationship pretty much. But
in terms of gaming, like the 6th generation was really like the point where I've talked about this on Twitter and on the channel before in various ways. Like, we got into sort of the main, a much more mainstreamification of gaming.
Yeah.
Where before, like, games targeted primarily children for quite some time. And if you were into them outside of that demographic, then you were probably some kind of an enthusiast, you know? Like, you read the magazines, you kept up on the internet, like, you were a self-identifying gamer. And I feel like around that time with 3D graphics getting much more robust and realistic and more believable, so, people didn't feel like they were playing like cartoons.
Yeah.
That was part of it. Along with the PS2 having that built-in DVD player and getting a lot of people on board like that. Along with just games having the capability to have like deeper stories and more varied mechanics, like we really started seeing a lot more. Like I've said before, that I consider like the fall of 2001 very specifically the most prominent dividing line between what I consider like retro gaming in the industry of old and like something much, much closer to the sort of status quo we have now.
For sure. Yeah. Anyway, this is all kind of prelude to get to the point, because I think it's only natural to feel down at times when you feel the weight of everything kind of hit you at once, and you're not prepared for it, you're not braced for it. We're only human. We're flesh and blood and a lot of weird brain chemicals, and so we were preparing to do this episode, and then a Nintendo Direct hit. And ironically, the Nintendo Direct, I think, realigned the mood of a lot of the fan base. So I was like, should we still do this episode? And I was like, no, it still applies, because we can touch upon some of this into the larger narrative. And then, of course, there was a bigger announcement. I mean, theoretically bigger for the Donkey Kong fandom after the Direct, after Malik and I did our episode, and we'll be touching upon that as well. But thinking about like how briefly pessimistic I got, not pessimistic, just morose about, feeling out of place for the Nintendo fandom. It took me back to the buyout era when I first felt like this, and I was enraged by it. Cause the buyout era, which is what we refer to at DK Vine roughly from the end of 2002 up to Donkey Kong Country Returns 2010, like the largest gulf of time we have in our mostly made up eras when it comes to the Donkey Kong universe. The buyout era was the most uncertain. It was the most full of drama, and part of that was because I was uncertain and full of drama, and as one of the voices of DK Vine, I was controlling the narrative, at least when it comes to the Donkey Kong fandom, and I regret that now. But the buyout era, let me just say up front, the buyout era is not the same as the current one that we're in as far as how we should be feeling, because the buyout era, for all the good things it provided us, and mostly that we recognize in retrospect, right? The Jungle Beat turns out was a fantastic game, and they meant no ill will towards, for example, Diddy Kong by his exclusion. And we can look at Jungle Beat in a more positive light now. But I think a lot of the angst of the buyout era was justified because we didn't know. We just didn't know. It was uncharted territory, and hindsight is one thing. Like, we can look back at history and say, oh, this is how we should have felt. But when you're living it, you don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. And so it's kind of like coping, and we had never been there before. So I look back at the buyout era and I'm like, we should have been excited because we were getting so many Donkey Kong games. Jungle Beat was pretty fun. We were getting the Pay-On games, which were heavy on the fan service. Diddy Kong was in Super Smash Bros. For the first time. Rare was releasing title after title, Grabbed by the Ghoulies, Conquer Live and Reloaded, Viva Pinata. Like, the whole Viva Pinata series is kind of overlooked when we're talking about the buyout era, but that was a huge thing. And we're like, why were we so pessimistic? And it's because there was no forward momentum. Forward momentum coupled with the uncertainty of what direction does Nintendo really want to take Donkey Kong in, because that was all over the map too.
Mm-hmm. And I think it was also just like the comparison between where we had been in the year 2000.
Right.
I remember you talking before about how you looked back on your E3 2001 news coverage and just how strangely matter-of-fact it was about, like, well, we're getting a new Donkey Kong puzzle game and Donkey Kong Racing has been announced. Because you guys had gotten so used to the status quo being every year we're gonna get some awesome new Donkey Kong games.
Yeah.
We're gonna get some awesome new DKU games. And to have that just cut off and for the series to go in so many suddenly go in so many different directions, none of them really feeling quite like the main one. I think that was always part of it too, that this is more relevant to Banjo, but I've always said, like, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts would have been taken on its own merits if it had come out anywhere near approximate to a quote-unquote real Banjo-Kazooie game.
Sure. And you know, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts is an entire adventure. It's an entire game, but it's a hard sell. And it's also called Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts, which almost implies it's a spin-off. You know, were it called Banjo 3E, I'm sure people would still be upset, but it would be a statement nonetheless. Like, this is Banjo 3E. Love it or leave it. These colors don't run. But, you know, I think it was just like, oh, we're not getting a real Banjo game. This is it. I do have, you know, complaints about the way they rolled out Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts and introduced it to the fan base. There was a lot of missteps there. But again, hindsight, you look back at Nuts and Bolts and you're like, that was a good game. That was a great game. Jungle Beat, that was a great game. But you can't kind of separate the time without bringing up that mistranslated IGN interview, right? Where they basically, they were made to look like they were shit-talking Donkey Kong Country and Rare's creations when they weren't doing that at all. But we didn't speak a lick of Japanese. We didn't know. We took IGN at face value because they were the big gaming site.
And nobody thought to check it. That's another big thing.
Yeah, I mean,
and also just everybody, you know, when I say everybody, I mean, like, the people who were in the fandom back then. Like you said, if you're the old man of the fandom, like, how old were you in 2005? And you were even then the oldest person among us. So how much younger was the general age of the Donkey Kong fandom, like, in the buyout era?
Yeah, I couldn't even rent a car, I think.
Right.
So it was still like, I look back at that time and I wince, but also it's understandable. But the point is, I've been there, right? And so while I wish I had thought of the buyout era as this kind of extension of the golden years, it could never be that, because you're right. It was a marked departure from where we were, and the uncertainty and the lack of direction, because Donkey Kong was all over the fucking map at that point. You know, I've talked about this before, which seems to be the mantra of this episode, but we had bongo games. We had a bongo platformer that had no reoccurring characters in it aside from Donkey Kong and the banana. Am I right, people? You had the Payon games, which were peg swingers, but very heavy on fan service, even like bringing back the bats from Donkey Kong 64, which is still the most incredible thing, and you know, shoring up that the purple parrot is named Quox and all of that. Then you had Mario versus Donkey Kong, and all of a sudden they're trying to cast Donkey Kong in this villainous light again, and it's like, what are you doing? What are you doing, Nintendo? You're all over the place. And that's not even getting into, you know, Rare and every game release seeing it kind of flop on store shelves, and you're just feeling like, oh no, are they gonna shut down Rare? What's gonna happen? Oh, Conker Live and Reloaded didn't do very well. Conker's not going to be the Xbox mascot. Oh, cross that one off our wish list. You know?
And with hindsight, and I think this is very applicable to today, so much of that wasn't really the result. And I can only see this with hindsight. I can only see this with the perspective that I have on it now. But I think it's, like I said, I think this is applicable now, and I think it's something that people should be reminded of. A lot of the reasons that, for example, Conker Live and Reloaded flopped, didn't really have a whole lot to do with Rare's decisions or Microsoft's decisions. or even the way that the Donkey Kong series was going and how it was being portrayed with Nintendo's decisions. It was more getting back to what we were saying earlier about the video game market just radically changing around the 6th generation.
Yeah.
Platformer mascots were not the system sellers that they had been even just 5 years earlier.
Yeah. And when you have lived that, when you were part of that world, you don't notice the world has changed around you until one cold day you wake up and you don't recognize it anymore. But, I mean, like, we talked about the sudden onset of change, right? But I think there were other realizations that were much slower to dawn upon us. And that was one of them, right? Like, especially as a Nintendo fan and growing up as a Nintendo fan and only like viewing like the Genesis and then later the PlayStation as these kind of remote things that friends of friends might have, but you have never really lived in that world from my perspective. But, and then Rare goes with this upstart, Xbox, and then all of a sudden you're in that world too. You don't know how to get through. Like, you just know the way things were with Nintendo. And I think that was a learning curve for everyone at Rare, for sure. And it took up until like Xbox changing to be more like Nintendo for Rare to kind of meet them halfway and be a big success now on Xbox. But it took a while to get there. I mean, it just, anyway.
That's one of the things I've always heard is that Rare spent copious amounts of time in the run up to the GameCube release learning that hardware, working on prototypes for that hardware. And so then when they got sold to Microsoft, they had to spend the vast majority of that generation coming to terms with the Xbox hardware instead.
And it's just it was a completely different market too. And
exactly.
So when you have something like Grab by the Ghoulies, basically almost in the can, what do you do with Grab by the Ghoulies? Microsoft wanted them to, broaden their appeal, get into the family market, but marketing Grab by the Ghoulies as this cute family game didn't do very well, either for sales or its reputation for the longest time. So
yeah, that was the status quo of that generation, because it's why Rare was kind of a very strange fit, very tough fit for the Xbox, especially in that era, because the PlayStation 2 basically appealed to everybody except Sega fans. Everything was on the PS2. The GameCube focused primarily on families, and it still had the usual core Nintendo demographic that Nintendo consoles always have, but it did very, very well with families. And the Xbox went for like the hardcore gamer crowd, the a little bit older demographic, and also made a lot of new converts to console gaming with Halo.
Yeah.
So Rare's style of games had a difficult time sort of finding a place to live on the Xbox.
Indeed it did. Much to DK Vine's dismay. And I bring up this history of the buyout era because I want to kind of give us some perspective and grounding to look back at the last time the fandom was really pessimistic. And look, like even in the buyout era, we had a lot of good things we didn't realize. But the core underlying reason of why we were feeling so downbeat in the buyout era does not apply to 2021. So let's go on this journey together, Josh, and everyone listening. There are so many dots to connect about what's happening with Donkey Kong and even the broader Donkey Kong universe. And we're going to hit upon them all, tie it all together, and hopefully coming out of this episode, you're going to see, oh my God, like, yeah, Nintendo didn't tweet about Donkey Kong's 40th anniversary, but oh my God, so much good is happening behind the scenes. And we're about to experience what I call the decade of Donkey Kong. And as somebody who lived through the last decade of Donkey Kong, 1994 through 1999, I don't throw around such terms willy-nilly. This isn't hyperbole. I really do believe we are about to enter a new golden age of Donkey Kong games. So first of all, let's talk about the news that the conversation has not talked about yet. And that is the official announcement of the Donkey Kong Country expansion to Super Nintendo World. So literally this episode went live the very day they announced this. The last episode of the conversation went live the very day they announced this. And I was like, shit. I hate when that happens. When a big, like, era-defining story breaks and you've already got your last episode in the can.
I mean, I don't... You know, we've known for a fact that this was happening for, God, literally years at this point, haven't we?
Since 2017. The thing is, Josh, I mean, well, 2017, it was like, oh, they might be doing this. Like, you look at, like, their plans, and there's maybe, like, a Yoshi park and a Zelda park. Maybe I forget the actual ones. But when it was all broken down, the sole survivors were Mario and Donkey Kong. And we knew for certain this was happening, I think, since maybe 2018, 2019. But it's...
Well, we also knew since last year when Super Nintendo World was actually unveiled, like, and you could actually go there, and it was very, very clear to see that, what are they working on over there?
Yeah, there was a whole chunk of the park that mysteriously matched the shape of the diagram that had leaked. Right. The thing is, though, like, we've like known about this story on DK Vine for 4 years, more than 4 years. It's an old story, crazy. But you look at mainstream coverage and they're treating it like it's a new thing with something nobody knew about. Cause when Nintendo released this, when Universal actually released this press release this week, and of course it was Universal Japan, so they released it in the dead of night, like in the early AM hours here on the East Coast, and I was in bed. I was asleep like a responsible adult. And so I wake up and I get comments on Twitter. I thought DK Vine would have had this first. And I'm like, well, what do you want? Me to stay up all night like a meth addict waiting for Donkey Kong news to break? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take care of my health so I can do these podcasts.
I know what you mean. I got somebody very nicely wishing me well a while back and was like, you know, best of luck to you and your team. I'm one guy and like my beta reader who is an indispensable, but like I don't consider myself to have a team.
Yeah, I've got a staff that's a volunteer basis staff who will, you know, pitch in with news stories, and they'll stream every now and then, but you know, they don't get paid. They're doing it just because they like to do it. Like most responsibilities fall on me. And I, you know, because that's the way it should be if I'm not paying them, and I don't have a team, and I'm also working, you know, side jobs to make ends meet, and I'm broken on the inside, Josh. I don't know if you can feel. I don't know if you can reach inside of my chest, but the parts aren't whole anymore. I'm frayed at both ends. I'm gonna break any day now. Anyway,
I mean, then I'll host the conversation for you. That's fine. I got this.
I've never missed an episode, Josh. I refuse to break my streak. I'm like Goldberg in the '90s. My streak. I'm gonna be Jerry Flynn 10 times.
But one of these days, Scott Hall's gonna come up to you dressed like a security guard, wearing that yellow shirt, holding a cattle prod.
And that would be a great episode of the conversation. I look forward to that.
You welcome it at this point.
No, but anyway, it was announced in the dead of night, and it struck me as funny because, you know, we knew this was coming. I mentioned it on the last episode of the conversation. I thought Miyamoto, when he came out on the Direct, was going to officially make this announcement.
That was my first thought too, and that made what he actually announced even more of a mindfuck.
Yeah, which makes me wonder if maybe wires got crossed and they were going to bring this up on the Direct, and why did it come just a couple days later? I don't know. But anyway, when you're dealing with another large corporation like Universal, I'm sure there's a lot of considerations that have to be made, but yeah, they announced this, and all of a sudden the mainstream sites were like treating it like this is the first time they've ever heard of it. And I'm just like, yo, like DK Vine, I know doesn't have credibility in mainstream eyes, but I've labeled everything on this diorama. Have you seen that? Have you seen that?
Yeah, it is funny how things can fall through the cracks. I always think about, like, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe when that came out on the Switch, and articles were talking about it like it was just this brand new Mario Kart game because so few people had a Wii U that it functionally was.
Yeah. And I'm sounding bitter and like conceited, like I want credit for it, because I wasn't the one who first broke this story. Theme park websites leaked a lot of this stuff. I just, shorted up for Donkey Kong fans. I mean, that's what I do. But anyway, the theme park was announced, and I
think honestly, like if it makes you feel better, part of that is because, like we said earlier in the episode, you don't clickbait things. You don't come out here and like. You joke about making dioramas, but you don't like make memes like meant to trend on social media about the things that or about the things that you've heard.
Yeah.
And just saying things in a podcast are putting them in text form on Twitter, like that doesn't have the reach that like something more visual does, I guess.
Yeah. And of course, like the proximity of this announcement with the most recent announcement, like all the comments on all the like news sites were like, well, Seth Rogen's getting his own theme park? I'm so clever.
Well, of course.
Yeah. I want to read to you an excerpt from the press release, though, because this is this is translated. This is roughly translated. So forgive me if there's any impressions that we walk away from that Universal hates Diddy Kong, that he wasn't fresh enough for this theme park. Hopefully, right. We've avoided any faux pas like that. All right. Since its opening, the first phase of Mario's World has been visited and experienced by many guests and has received a great deal of feedback. We have decided to expand, as if they just decided this.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. We have decided to expand the new area with the aim of further increasing satisfaction with Super Nintendo World and revitalizing the leisure and entertainment industry. In the new area where Donkey Kong and his friends live in the lush jungle, you can enjoy the world of Donkey Kong with your whole body.
Yes! Oh, I love this. Unironically, I'm not making fun of it. I'm not saying it's bad. It reminds me of, like, playing Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation. It has that distinctly, like, hastily translated from Japanese quality to it, and I love that.
With your whole body through theme park experiences such as eating and drinking and selling.
What? Like Goldberg selling the cattle prod.
And innovative coaster type ride attractions. So, pulling it all together, we know the selling is obviously in reference to Funky's Flying By, which is going to be replicated from the diorama. And the interesting thing is they released a very low-res promotional image of Mario and Donkey Kong side by side in their respective halves of the park underneath them, which is really cool and gratifying for me, the Donkey Kong fan who always thinks Donkey Kong should be on par with or surpassing Mario.
Surpassing, yes.
One day, man. One day we'll get there. I'm the type of person who'll see Star Wars shit and be like, should be Mr. Pants. I'm just saying, one day we're going to get to the point where Mr. Pants is as well known as Darth Vader. That will be a happy day. I have to dream. I have to work towards something, right? So anyway, really cool image. But if you line up the little low res image of what the theme parks of what the Donkey Kong Country side of the theme park is going to look like with the diorama, it all pretty much lines up accurately. Some things have been altered probably for like just functionality purpose. Like you don't see a waterfall coming down the outside of Minecart Madness or whatever the Minecart roller coaster is going to be called. But yeah, I see people like already freaking out that, I can't make out Ellie the elephant as an animatronic, or Rambi, who we saw in the diorama. I don't think there's anything to be gleaned from that. I think there will still be animatronics in there. Whether they reference an obscure animal buddy from Donkey Kong Country 3 and Donkey Kong Land 3, I don't know. But keep the faith, you know. This is the biggest thing to happen to Donkey Kong since Donkey Kong Country. Josh, wow. This is huge. This is, I don't think the magnitude has really set in with the fandom yet, because it's not a new game and because the new game hasn't been announced yet. I can't begin to express how this is something I never thought we would see. How, if you're going to have a Super Nintendo world, as much as we, the Donkey Kong fans, would say like, oh, it would be so cool if the Congo jungle was a section. It does lend itself well to kind of the kinetic atmosphere of a theme park, right? There's always been jungle sections of theme parks. You can translate a minecart, level as a roller coaster fairly well. But you see it in the comments for Super Nintendo World outside of the Seth Rogen jokes. People are like, unironically, should have been Metroid. Or, why didn't you do Hyrule Land? That's what I want to see, Hyrule Land. And it is so meaningful as a Donkey Kong fan that we somehow tricked the executives at Universal Studios into allowing this to happen side by side with Mario. I mean,
yeah, we forced them to do it. That's right.
We won the ballot when they sent out the ballot. We just mobilized more, and that's how we got it in, just like K. Rool.
Ray J Pinball in the stream chat says Hyrule Land is not to be confused with Hyle Land.
No, this is Hyle Land.
I feel like the Donkey Kong Land basically is about what Hyle Land would be.
Yeah, you just need more Mr. Pants in there, and it's a done deal.
Yeah, you know, but you are 100% right. What I was mentally preparing for as you were saying, this is the biggest thing to happen to Donkey Kong since, was that you were going to say Donkey Kong Country Returns. And I was going to agree and be like, yeah, and maybe it's a bigger deal than that. But as soon as you instead threw me a curveball and said Donkey Kong Country, I was like, God damn, he's right.
Yeah,
he's absolutely 100% right.
Donkey Kong Country Returns was a big deal, obviously, since the park is based mostly on the aesthetic of Donkey Kong Country Returns, right? It's a big deal. Makes sense. But Donkey Kong Country Returns was a game that did very well on the Wii. It got a sequel that didn't do so well in the Wii U, and essentially, then because of the fan backlash. The Metroid fan backlash, among many other factors, essentially forced Retro to change tracks and not make any more Donkey Kong games. Now, I'm not saying that they would have made a third Donkey Kong game if the reception was, unanimous. Like, oh yes, another Donkey Kong game from Retro. Party in the USA. If Tropical Freeze
had somehow saved the Wii U.
Yeah, I think Retro would have always gone for a new IP because they were ready to do something different. And I would never want a creator to be forced to stagnate. That's why I don't hold any ill will towards somebody like Greg Mayles for not wanting to do another Banjo-Kazooie game. Because if he has all he has to say about Banjo-Kazooie, like, I want Banjo-Kazooie to continue. I want somebody else to take the reins. But, I don't want a creator chained to their desk making the same series if they want to expand their creative muscles. If they have creative muscles to stretch, then by all means, And so I can't begrudge Retro for moving on after Tropical Freeze. But Returns was as important as it was, it brought back DK Vine from the Abyss, right? I wouldn't be here right now if it wasn't for Donkey Kong Country Returns. I say all that, but it seems like it was a narrative dead end. The Retro games were, which is weird to say because they defined Donkey Kong up through the present day.
Right.
But we're not getting any more. At least not in the foreseeable future. So Donkey Kong has to move on. It just has to. Or else we're just not going to get games. So that's partially why EPD has reportedly just taken it in and be like, if Donkey Kong's going to be a pillar of Nintendo, it's got to actually have a stable home environment. And it hasn't had that since Rare. so let's make it so. I mean that's essentially Miyamoto taking charge of his baby. And it just is what it is. I wish Retro was a little bit bigger. I wish they could handle 2 games at once. It would be great if that could have been their permanent home. It's just not in the cards. So, yeah, this is a much bigger deal than anything we've seen since 1994, because this is going to bring Donkey Kong to the masses in a way that hasn't been seen since Rare did it on the Super Nintendo.
And that is, I believe we probably discussed this last time. When you say the Retro Studios games were a narrative, how did you put it? Like a narrative dead end?
Yeah, that's harsh. That's hard. I realize how harsh that sounds.
I worry that might come across like you're saying that they couldn't have been followed up on, or that the way I take that, and I think what you mean by that is that as much as we loved them, and as much as there are people who now grew up with them or who are nostalgic for them, they didn't. Those games, more like you can see in retrospect, were very much made for us, for the existing Donkey Kong fans.
Yes and no. I would say they were made for a new audience to fall in love with Donkey Kong Country, but there was a shocking lack of fan service among them.
Sure,
For more on that, listen to the episode Jeff and I did right before E3, where we talked about the importance of characters. Where Jeff famously went on this rant about how if you don't put Ingard the Swordfish in your Donkey Kong game, you have failed.
Well, let me put it like this then. Maybe
Okay.
not for us, but the way that the Donkey Kong Country Returns games, Returns and Tropical Freeze, were positioned seemed to be, if New Super Mario Bros. Is the 2D platformer for the whole family.
Yeah.
Donkey Kong Country, then, is the 2D platformer for the hardcore gamer.
New Super Mario Brothers is platforming 101. Donkey Kong Country Returns is sort of graduate level studies in platforming.
Yes, pretty much. And I remember several years, 4 years ago now, when I was working on the episode, my episode for Donkey Kong Country Returns, I struck up a conversation with a dad in like a game store, and somehow the topic of DKC Returns came up. He said he had a young son, and he'd gotten him Donkey Kong Country Returns. It was Returns or Tropical Freeze. I can't remember which one.
I remember this story.
For his kid, and his kid didn't make it past the first world.
Yeah.
And I have nothing but great things to say about the Retro Studios games, but when you talk about Donkey Kong being like a pillar of Nintendo that can appeal, and I'm not saying that a game has to be easy or has to I'm not saying that only easy games can appeal to the masses, because for example, the opening couple of hours of the Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild are relatively pretty challenging. You'll inevitably get a lot of game overs, and that game was huge.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the old school difficulty, the Returns games are in many ways more challenging than the Super Nintendo originals.
Oh, for sure. Sure. Yeah. And I think Retro took that lesson to heart when they were trying to break down the original Donkey Kong Country games. They were like, hey, these are pretty hard. What if that was the hook? And I love that they did that. And I love Returns. There's this notion in the fandom now that Returns is somehow the bad one, or the one that's not as good. Just because Tropical Freeze did everything so much better. Sure. But Returns is great too. Returns, I will even make the argument that it is a better game than the original Donkey Kong Country in every way, except maybe character.
Even in comparison to Tropical Freeze, sorry to interrupt you, but even in comparison to Tropical Freeze, there are things that I like about Returns. There are strengths that it has, and I think one of the biggest ones is just the levels are a little bit more bite-sized and a little bit more self-contained, which makes them a lot more replayable to me.
Yeah, and it's great fun. You know, somebody asked me on Twitter the other month, like, "Hey, I have a choice between Donkey Kong Country Returns and Donkey Kong Country Returns 3D. What's the better game?" And I was like, ultimately, it just depends what you're looking for. I think they're both equally valid experiences. I will find with Returns 3D, frame rate issues aside, it's much more fun to just kick back wherever you are with your 3DS and experience those levels. There is something very comforting about like just hopping into a level and playing it on your 3DS, and you can really, I think, appreciate, especially with the 3D effects of the 3DS, you can really appreciate just the level of depth in the environments Retro created, frame rate issues aside. But yeah, I mean, I say narrative dead end. That sounds way harsher than I intended. I mostly just mean that we got 2 games from it. And 2 ports and a lot of references in Mario games. But, again, momentum. There was no momentum coming out of that because Retro, the way they are formed as a studio, the way they're structured, we could never have the momentum of what Rare did back in the day or what EPD could do for Donkey Kong in the future. So
Retro didn't even have any barns.
Right? I'm sure there's plenty of barns in Texas. They just didn't look. And obviously, like the new direction of Donkey Kong is going to be rooted in what Rare did, but also what Retro did. Like the fact that the theme park is modeled after Retro is mostly virtue of when the theme park was conceived, right? Because the theme park was conceived sometime after Tropical Freeze. Right around the time that this other studio was doing the next Donkey Kong game until they weren't. And so, I mean, obviously they were going to go with what they had, the most recent kind of interpretation of Donkey Kong's world. And I think by virtue of this being in the theme park, then this will influence EPD going forward. So Retro has left their mark. I don't want anybody to think otherwise. This will definitely be part of the look and feel of Donkey Kong forever now. But just like Mario can change and evolve from game to game while you still have those iconic elements cropping up, I think it'll be the same with Donkey Kong. So, and if you are a fan of Donkey Kong Country Returns, well, I've got great news for you. There's going to be a theme park that's mostly based on it. So,
yeah, and I guess my point is, while you do see just, like, you really, for Tropical Freeze especially, now that it doesn't have the should-have-been Metroid, like, ephemera surrounding its discourse, you really see more love for that than you ever did before.
Didn't you hear, though? I mean, now it's the theme park that's getting should-have-been Metroid, so.
That's true, yeah. But I do think it's telling, I guess, that I don't feel like I see nearly the sort of formative I grew up with this kind of nostalgia for DKC Returns now that we did really start seeing for Donkey Kong Country, the original trilogy, in like the mid-2000s.
You're right. And Donkey Kong Country also had that longevity because it had the Game Boy Advance games, which so many people in our community, that was their gateway. The Donkey Kong Country for Game Boy Advance trilogy introduced them to the games. And that's, I mean, as I've said before, that is what basically taught Nintendo, this is the direction for Donkey Kong. This is what Donkey Kong needs to be because this is what's selling well. Every time we roll out Donkey Kong Country, it surpasses the sales of any other interpretation of Donkey Kong. If Donkey Kong's going to be a franchise, it's gotta be, and I know it's not called that in Japan, but you know what I mean, right?
Sure.
Like, so.
Yeah, those, like, man, Nintendo fandom, not just Donkey Kong fandom, Nintendo fandom in the 2000s was just so relentlessly cynical, and just one of the things that they just, I mean, it's one of those hindsight is 2020 things. They just didn't, like, understand how incredibly important this stuff was gonna be.
Yeah.
Or how, like, the next generation was gonna see it.
Yeah, and to your point, like Donkey Kong Country Returns doesn't have the cultural footprint that the country games had. It's because they were so hard. You're right. You're absolutely right. It was because they scared off little Timmy. And little Timmy fell down a well because he ran away from Donkey Kong Country Returns. And it's a Lassie reference for you boomers. If you boomers are listening, I know you boomers love Lassie. I don't know. We're talking about generations, and I felt like I needed to throw the boomers a bone. Because again, then Lassie can eat the bone. It's a win-win. It's a win-win, Josh.
I believe they aired Lassie on extremely early in the morning on Nickelodeon when I was very young.
I remember that, and I was like, you can't play anything else? Like, I was always I was always confusing Lassie with Old Yeller, and I was just waiting for the episode where they had to put Lassie down. Because I had it in my head that Lassie died at some point, right?
That would have been even more traumatic than David the Gnome's ending.
Oh, don't tell me. Don't spoil it for me. Anyway, so my point is that if you are a Donkey Kong Country Returns fan, you don't have to worry. Like that aspect of the series is going to be taken care of. But I think they need to find a happy medium, right? Like doing Donkey Kong as like the most challenging game on a Nintendo console or the most challenging platform on a Nintendo console didn't really make the new hardcore crowd that the Rare games did. And I think Nintendo EPD is going to make a game that's easier than Retro's games, but nonetheless nuanced and full of surprises. But yeah, this theme park is what's going to make new Donkey Kong fans, because they're going to go to this. They're going to fall in love with the minecart ride, right? And then that's going to, they're going to get into the games from this. I mean, this is what happens. This is the kind of like cultural permutation we've always wanted. And this is just going about it in a kind of a reverse way where we're getting the theme park, before we're getting the thing that inspires it. So all those people that say like, and I know we got what inspires it, but the theme park is going to be a bigger deal than the thing that inspires it, is what I'm trying to say. Like Harry Potter Land, wherever that, you know what I'm talking about. The Wizarding World, whatever. That theme park attraction, that was based on the runaway success of Harry Potter and the books and the movies and everything. Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, same thing. We're getting this after a relatively fallow 20 years where Donkey Kong has never reached the highs it's reached in the 90s. And this is all based on Miyamoto and Nintendo really having grand designs for Donkey Kong. Otherwise, this wouldn't be a thing. If they're just like, all right, let's just let this series die. We'll do a game every now and then when somebody has a great idea for Donkey Kong. If that was the case, we would not be seeing this. This would be Hyrule Land, right? There have been so many Nintendo instances of them taking minecarts from Donkey Kong and applying it to something else. This would have been Kirby, right? Like, if they were concerned about this, this is what they're going to be pushing because they're going to be pushing Donkey Kong. And
it's interesting too, because like, there are Kirby cafes in Japan. Kirby has quite a cultural footprint in Japan. And man, like ever since we first saw these concepts, and especially ever since it was confirmed that they really are following through with it, because, it was kind of touch and go. It's like, man, that would be incredible, but are they actually going to do it? And now we know they're actually doing it. And ever since then, it's just been impossible for me to be like overtly cynical about the future of the series, because there's no way that they're gonna, it just goes to show like, the reason Donkey Kong is getting this, and Metroid isn't, and Zelda isn't, is still because Donkey Kong has that, like... Donkey Kong is a known entity that resonates outside of just, like, diehard Nintendo fandom, or even diehard gamer fandom, in a way that most of Nintendo's other IPs aren't. And
you say Donkey Kong to anybody of any age, they will probably know what you're referring to.
Exactly. And that's not the same. That's not the case for something. If I ask somebody, hey, what do you think of Samus? What do you think of Tingle?
And that this is based off Donkey Kong Country. Ray Day in the chat asked, "What's it called in Japan?" Super Donkey Kong. It's what it's called, and then they've just kind of gotten away from that, and it's just Donkey Kong blank. But it's never country. The country branding, I think they're going to go with the country branding here in Orlando,
sure,
and Hollywood if it comes there. But by the way, the estimated ETA, I said estimated time of arrival. I realize I just said that. The ETA is coming in Osaka, 2024. That's how long it's going to take to build this. It's under construction now, and we were all thinking, oh, it's under construction now, it'll be ready by like next summer. No, 2024. It's going to take a while to get the Congo jungle just great. And at the rate we're tearing down the rainforest, Josh, it apparently takes even longer to build it back up.
An inconvenient truth, yes.
Yeah, I mean, it is what it is, right? I hope this really, counteracts us tearing down the Amazon. Like, oh, but we've torn down a larger chunk of the Amazon, but at least we have the Congo jungle in Osaka or in Orlando.
But we have a Funky Kong animatronic, so, it's okay. Trade-off, it's worth it.
2024 in Osaka. In Orlando, it's apparently coming the year after that, 2025. But that is based on Donkey Kong Country, Super Donkey Kong, that it's the Congo jungle. I said when we were talking about the EPD rumors that Donkey Kong Country has won. Like, Donkey Kong Country is the foundation of what Donkey Kong is going forward. And this proves it. This isn't the great girder grapple or like, remember that, the Wii game when the Wii was new, you had like the Nintendo Park game. What was that called?
Nintendo Land, the Wii U.
Nintendo Land, right. Yeah. And, the Donkey Kong section of that was arcade themed. And we at DK Vine, we lost our shit. We were just like, how dare they?
I love Nintendo Land. I still love Nintendo Land. That was a great game.
But the real Nintendo Land.
Yeah.
look what the real Nintendo Land has provided us. And so in 10 years from now, after the decade of Donkey Kong, people aren't going to be saying should have been Metroid. They're going to be advocating for Donkey Kong and other things where Donkey Kong is not applicable, right? This is going to make Donkey Kong fans. Even if I've seen so many comments too, like, I don't ride roller coasters. I have motion sickness. Oh, I'm never going to go to Japan. Oh, Florida's never going to get COVID under control. I'm not going to go there. Even if you will never visit this park, you have to recognize what a big deal this is and the ramifications it's going to have for a fandom. It's going to be a perpetual energy boost to Donkey Kong brand and IP, and that's only going to mean good things for games going forward. If that's all you're in this for is games, this is a good thing. Mm-hmm. So,
and that's sort of why I bring up Kirby. One reason that I bring up Kirby, because like I said, Kirby gets cafes. Kirby has I've gone on Google Earth before, and I've just like gone to like these places where there's these giant Kirby statues. Mm-hmm. It just, like, part of the reason Kirby is just so consistently taken care of by Nintendo.
Yeah.
And always has been. And I think, like you said, it's not just like, oh, I'm not going to Japan. I'm not going to ride a roller coaster. But it's the confidence in the brand and what that says about how it will be positioned, that regardless of whether a theme park excites you or not, the fact that they're putting it on the same level as Mario, as the second park opening in Super Nintendo World, is just, it can mean nothing but good things for us.
Absolutely. And, that Kirby comparison is an apt one, because We've always said at DK Vine, we just wish we were at Kirby's level, where we're consistently taken care of, where we don't have anything to really worry about, because our games won't necessarily set the world on fire, maybe, but we know there will always be another game. Just kind of slightly under the radar. Where they're positioning Donkey Kong is above Kirby, honestly. Yeah. That's where they have designs to take it. Whether it reaches that or not, I don't know, but having this theme park will go a long way towards making generations of Donkey Kong fans. So,
and relatedly, I know you guys talked about this last week, but I haven't really gotten to say much about it because I think that's sort of the same sort of line of thinking is why my reaction to what Miyamoto actually said in the Nintendo Direct was very different from how most people reacted. Like, yeah, I thought it was bonkers and ridiculous and funny, but I couldn't possibly be down on the news that Donkey Kong and Cranky Kong were gonna be in a movie together.
Yeah.
And just the
So if this is some people's first conversation, so instead of just, I want them to go back and listen to last week's episode, but I want to actually read the quote from Miyamoto. I've got it right here. Even though this is a Mario movie, Donkey Kong will also be making an appearance. That distinction right there is so vitally important. Yeah, that shows you where Miyamoto's headspace is. That is where DK Vine has reported Miyamoto's headspace has been for a while now. But Miyamoto has been Donkey Kong's greatest champion behind the scenes. Miyamoto is a large reason why all of this is happening. And I think we have to give him his due. I mean, he was the boogeyman for DK Vine for the longest time because we associated his decisions with everything that went wrong. He was obviously the creator of Donkey Kong, so he hated what Rare did with it. And it turns out, the quotes that have been attributed to him have mostly been debunked. And while I have no doubt that there was animosity towards Yoshi's Island's direction and Nintendo feeling uncomfortable with it in light of Donkey Kong Country, he's not a spiteful man, Miyamoto. He doesn't seem to be spiteful. And the fact that he loves Cranky Kong, he loves that Rare took his creation, his original creation, and made him a bitter old man. The fact that he finds that delightful has really made me reevaluate what I understood about Miyamoto, and it's like he gets it. He gets the joke. Whether or not I will always agree with Miyamoto, because Miyamoto's he has fundamentally different philosophies than I have when it comes to gaming, but that's fine. That's great, because I think at his heart, Miyamoto always has the series' best interest right there. And so I can't begrudge him for that. I'll make fun of him wanting Donkey Kong to blow on things in returns. But oh well, it didn't break the game. It was silly and a time waster, slowed everything down, and Retro junked it in Tropical Freeze, but that's no reason to be angry.
And I think it takes a balance too, because, you say some of Miyamoto's philosophies are sometimes counter to what you want out of a game. I feel like his philosophies are very, in line with with at least the primary stuff that I generally want out of a game. And I think having a voice, basically just having a game that focuses on those attributes, not necessarily to the exclusion of everything else, but who will kind of say, we need to think about how this impacts gameplay. We need to think of an interesting mechanic here. Not necessarily meaning we need to remove all lore and story and just have everything happen and characters, just put it all in a menu. But like I said, I think it takes a balance, and I think there's a reason that Miyamoto was able to create the franchises, the many franchises that he has.
Right, and he reminds me of, comic creators of yore, like Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, where they come up with the basis of so many bases of characters, and then later writers come along and really flesh them out later and add all the, accumulated lore over the years.
And that's natural. That's what kind of has to happen with a long running series. I think I get on this about some of the things that the Sonic fandom says lately about original author intent and what Yuji Naka wanted Sonic to be, and like are like things like long-running franchises are inevitably going to change over time. There is like, well, I guess another example of that. One of the things I regret about my own DKC Returns episode was being so hard on Donkey Kong punching the moon. I think I came across very cynically about that in retrospect.
No, you're right about that. Still not over that one, Josh. Give it another 10 years or so. Yeah, I mean, it's basically, you know, when you look at some, you know, the intent of the author is kind of a silly notion to have, especially when DK Vine is factoring in, like, well, who's the author? Miyamoto, the Stampers, Greg Mails, you know, like where do you draw the line there? I guess, and then
go ahead.
And then, like, when the authors disagree, when Rare builds up a shared universe, but Chris Seaver's like, well, it's not my intention that Conquer is part of the shared universe. It's like, well, too late now. You know, that train has left the station. So it's like, I see all these, like, word of gods being thrown back in DK Vine's face. Well, actually, Greg Mail says this about Banjo existing with Donkey Kong's World. I was like, great. Rare's website from 1997 says this.
Yeah, like, it's all fiction anyway.
Right.
And what I was going to say is just, I've really come to appreciate the nuance in, like, analyzing something through the lens of itself, right? Like, taking Donkey Kong Country Returns, for example, and comparing it directly, like, how it stacks up compared to the original trilogy, is a perfectly valid way of looking at it. It's not wrong to do that. But it's equally not wrong to like examine how it stands on its own merits.
Yeah, yeah, and
like
I think
both lenses are totally valid and totally valuable, and make for some interesting insight.
Yeah,
and I think especially diehard fandoms tend to get too into only analyzing things through the fandom lens, like through the lens of their fandom and through the lens of, like, what they, like, their expectations for what the series is supposed to be based on what it was whenever they discovered it most of the time.
Yeah.
That, like, yeah, you know what I'm saying, right?
I do. And I'm thinking, like, you look at Star Wars as,
oh,
like,
I see. I was thinking it, but I didn't know if I wanted to go there.
we won't go down that well, because that's a deep, dark, nasty well to go down, but I think Star Wars is like the ultimate example of this, right? Mm-hmm. And it's basically my go-to example of what not to be as a fan. And you just look at the pettiness and the wars and the sniping and I mean, this has been going on in Star Wars fandom for longer than the Disney sequels, right? But
yeah, and very similarly, we've seen it happen exactly the same way with two generations of Star Wars fans now.
And that's exactly it. It's all generational. There will be fans in 20 years time defending the sequels and holding them up, just like there are prequel fans now doing the same.
And it's so weird to see, because I've never been a Star Wars fan. I have no stake in it, but I see and I hear things. I see people now saying, sometimes word for word, the exact same things about comparing the sequel trilogy to the prequel trilogy that 15 years ago I saw people saying about the prequel trilogy compared to the original trilogy. And it's just like, they don't, because how can they? They don't have, like, they weren't there. They don't have, like, the perspective on it. But, like, they don't generally, like, seem to know that we've been through this before.
Now that's Battlestar Galactica. That's a whole other topic. Yeah, it exhausts me to even think about Star Wars fandom, honestly. Like, and so I'm just gonna keep with where I am a master, right?
Right.
So yeah, speaking of movies, though, we essentially soft confirmed on the last episode that it is the plan. It is Illumination's plan and Nintendo's plan and Miyamoto's plan to kind of spin off a Donkey Kong movie from Donkey Kong and Cranky's appearance in this Mario movie. And so if you can't connect the dots yet here, if you're still pessimistic because they haven't announced the game yet, Josh, we've got a movie, big budget Hollywood movie, CGI with A-listers voicing our beloved characters. And I want to pick your brain on this because this is a topic you're well versed in, by this point with your own hyper fandom. But we've got that, and we've got the theme park. Of course, there's a game coming.
Yeah, like Nintendo is still primarily a game company. It's not like they're not gonna. You'd have to be really poorly managed, right? To come out with this big blockbuster movie and not have a game come out at least somewhat proximate to it, right?
Before, I would imagine. But yeah, like at this point, do you even need our sources to tell you what's happening? It should be transparent. And look, if Donkey Kong has this level of high stature, this is the stature that's usually only reserved for games being developed by Nintendo EPD. Right? Mm-hmm. Aside from like Pokemon, which is its own kind of almost divorced entity at this point, with you know, the Pokemon company and
Game Freak, and that's
it's basically almost like a whole other branch of the Nintendo Hydra. But Donkey Kong, even when he was with Rare, never got this kind of level of like stature that he's getting now. And like having Seth Rogen and Fred Armisen and like saying in a big budget Mario movie that the original Donkey Kong is now Cranky Kong.
Mm-hmm.
Think about that. Like they never even said that on the Donkey Kong Country cartoon. Like, that never even came up, that there was an original Donkey Kong and he was Cranky Kong. Like, the episode where he, like, reverts back to his youth, but it's not like they made any references to Donkey Kong Arcade with that. You know?
Mm-hmm.
They're shoring up DKU canon that we've been told by Nintendo zealots for years no longer applies. They are confirming it in Hollywood movies now. This is where we are as a fandom. Take stock of that.
Yeah, and like what it sounds to me like is that perhaps Cranky and DK are going to factor into like Mario's origin story. If they're going to talk about that in the movie, that was sort of my first thought. My second thought was just the way that they were describing it, like you said. It seems like they might be positioning this as like a potential spin-off.
That's the plan. That's from what I hear. This is the plan. Now, things can go awry, as they often do in Hollywood, and you can plan out your shared universe of movies, but things will fall apart because nobody can be the MCU but Marvel. But as terrifying as it is that they're going to get stuff wrong, and they will. I mean that's just the nature of the beast. But as terrifying as that is, it's so cool to just think about. I would have never thought this in my wildest daydreams. I would have thought about this, sure. And of course, there's the part of me that's like, damn it, I wanted to be the one to write the Donkey Kong screenplay, right? Like, but removing all of that from it, I can't be nothing but excited about this. And again, if you only care about the games, follow the trail. This is all going to lead to more games because people are going to go see the Donkey Kong movie, especially if they like the Mario movie and it introduces the character, and they're going to want to follow him as they do. And then they're going to be like, I like this. Oh, there's a Donkey Kong game. I'm going to pick that up. And then the whole world is just kind of blown open for them.
I mean, my first reaction was to sort of go like, dude, yeah, totally. Put your name out there. You have an Emmy award winning resume. So and then I got to thinking about it, and somebody who kind of has risen up out of the Sonic fandom named Tyson Hess was the person that they brought on board for the Sonic movie to redesign Sonic, and that gave him, that was very much responsible for the way that he looks in that movie. So, stranger things have happened.
So basically what you're saying is, Seth Rogen, I know you're listening to this.
Sure.
Maybe Fred, maybe you're listening to this, but I'm not going to write the screenplay. But if you need it punched up, and you need to add more Donkey Kongness to it, I'm your guy. I'm your person. I'll do it. I'll do it under the table. We won't even put my name in the credits. Just, it'll be our little secret. We all want this to succeed together.
What would Mr. Pants look like in CG?
It would be a tug of war in my psyche, trying to leave out the crazier connections. I can make this very oblique reference to Bleak. But that would be nonsense, and I'm not going to do it. This is where we could end the episode, Josh, honestly. It's the two biggest stories that haven't, the movie thing just kind of fell in our lap, but the theme park we've known about for almost half a decade. But now that it's confirmed, now that people can no longer doubt it or naysay it, I remember when COVID first broke out and people were saying the theme park is canceled. They're ending the theme park. Cause Universal announced plans that they were not doing their Epic Universe expansion, and they somehow misconstrued that as Super Nintendo World is dead. And you don't just pull deals like this that are so far in the works. Anyway, Josh, really quick, before we move on, I am worried about how this will feel, having Donkey Kong reinterpreted on the big screen through Hollywood actors and writers and whatever. How did you manage with the Sonic the Hedgehog movie?
Well, my answer there is basically, I guess, when I got into Sonic the Hedgehog, it was 27 different things already, even by that point.
Mm-hmm.
Sonic the Hedgehog never had just one core identity. It was the games. It was two cartoon series made by Geek Entertainment that ran at the same time and were completely tonally different from each other. It was the comic books. It was another overseas comic book that I didn't even know about. So just throwing another interpretation of Sonic the Hedgehog on the pile, I guess, was it was, and frankly, I talked about this back in my recent episode. That was one of the things that really appealed to me about Sonic. It taught me it taught me the concept of a multifaceted continuity where one character can branch out in many different directions, and I've always found that fascinating. And it's one reason people will try to tell me this is the real Sonic. This is what Sonic's really supposed to be. And I'm there was never one idea of what Sonic was supposed to be. So I guess I would just say, inevitably, you're right. This stuff, whatever they do with Donkey Kong, whatever they do with Mario, I don't think you can reinterpret something like this in a new medium and with such a mainstream audience in mind without it being kind of different. I mean, the MCU is quite distinct from what the Marvel comics were or what the cartoons were. But I think and I hope that however it comes out, it'll still have that soul to it. It'll still have the core. It's sort of, I like the Spider-Man analogy a lot, where Into the Spider-Verse is not, I'm sure, what Stan Lee ever conceptualized in the 1960s when he was writing Spider-Man. And all these different interpretations of the character that branch off in different directions and have different tones, I'm sure that's but they all sort of follow this same core idea.
Yeah.
And they all appeal in different ways, but with the same heart, I guess, if that makes sense.
Well, and I think we get so hung up on the notion of canon. What's canon? What counts? What can it disregard? And, you know, up until this point, the only really dividing line that fans, Donkey Kong fans have had is, Donkey Kong Country fans have had is the Donkey Kong Country games and the cartoon. And we can at least unite on the fact that, well, Donkey Kong's got to have a great ass. That's the most important unifying factor. But, you know, everything after that, like game wise, that's canon. Oh, those books, those juvenile books, those aren't canon. That comic isn't canon, but the games are canon. And now it's kind of gotten a little muddled because as far as the expanded Donkey Kong universe is concerned, we're getting all this, like, literature and comics that are canon to the games themselves. So it's kind of muddying the waters a bit as far if you factor in Sea of Thieves and Yooka-Laylee, and even before that, the Viva Pinata cartoon. And so it's like, well, a Donkey Kong movie or a Donkey Kong appearance in the Mario movie, that's gotta be canon. And I don't think these will be canon. I really don't. The more I think about it, I think they will probably inform the main canon, as something this huge will often do. It will inform the public's impression of canon, for sure, which is why it's so great that the Cranky Kong thing is going to be in there. Do you know how many people still think the Joker murdered Batman's parents? Because that was what was in the 1989 movie. And yeah, you know, even after, like, Batman Begins and, you know, the more geekification of culture, there are still people out there who think, well, the Joker murdered Bruce Wayne's parents because I saw it in the movie. So, I mean, this stuff matters, but if you're really, like, comic fans have been dealing with it for years, right? Like, if you're into the comics, well, this is the comics continuity. The movies don't count. But, you know, you can still enjoy them because I enjoy Batman, and so I will enjoy this interpretation of Gotham City. And I think that's what Donkey Kong fans need to get in the headspace of. So, because I don't think Miyamoto's ever going to come out and say, these are canon to the games. This is 100% the continuation of Mario's story, of Donkey Kong's story. That's not Miyamoto.
It's like it really goes against a company's best interest to do that, because if you say, okay, this is canon and this isn't canon, then you're kind of limiting yourself, not just in terms of what you can do with the series in the future, because, okay, well, if this isn't canon, that means we're never going to work with it again, or we're never going to see it again. You're probably gonna enrage the people who really like that part of the canon. And, like, it's just gonna make it a tougher sell the next time you want to go back and, like, market that part and market something from that again.
Yeah.
But
You're
I think
right. You're right.
It goes back to what I was saying earlier about sort of the fandom lens versus being able to take yourself out of your own expectations to an extent. Because, like, as an example, there are issues that I had with the way that Sonic's character was portrayed in the movie. And I recognize that all came down to how he differed from my idea of who Sonic, quote unquote, was supposed to be. And I can raise those criticisms and raise those concerns, but at some point I think it's also important to be able to step back and go, okay, it might not match what I wanted it to be exactly, but does that make it a bad character? And those are two, like, entirely separate, like, arguments, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So if something in this Mario movie, or something in a future Donkey Kong movie, or even something in this new game that EPD is working on contradicts your expectations for what Donkey Kong should be, it's not invalid to criticize that. But I think it's just people need to sort of prepare themselves to be able to take a moment and sort of ask, but is it bad on its own merits? And the answer may be yes. The answer may be that this still sucks. Maybe this still doesn't make any sense. Maybe this is a bad character. But if it's a bad character, or it's a bad decision, or a bad interpretation, it's bad because of the way it was executed, and not the way that it stands up to how Donkey Kong was portrayed in, say, the 1990s cartoon. Because, you know, I'm sure there'll be people who are expecting him to break out in song. That's very mimetic.
Yeah. And as somebody who hates that. Who absolutely, who I guess went through this when he first tuned into the Donkey Kong Country cartoon show on Fox Family that one weekend morning. So excited because I saw it in TV Guide, because that's how old I am, and I was like, oh my god, there's a Donkey Kong Country cartoon. Oh my god,
I know this so well, man. I read that feature many times as a kid.
And, I was just expecting all these great things, like, oh my god, I hope Rambi's in it. I hope he rides Rambi. And then you see it, and they break, like, it's just like, wait, what's happening? Oh no. And, but I've gotten to the point where, even though I will never enjoy the Donkey Kong Country cartoon personally, I just can't. It's just too wildly divergent. I respect that people do enjoy it, and that I'm quite appreciative that even through its meme status, I'm appreciative that it's brought people into the series, that it played such an outsized role in having converts for K. Rool to get into Smash Brothers and ultimately reviving the character. And that's what this movie will be, even if we hate it. This movie will bring in Donkey Kong fans. And I can't see that as anything but a good thing, because more Donkey Kong fans equals more people who are going to be willing to buy the games. And again, if that's all you care about, this is a good thing.
Sure, absolutely. And also, the cartoon hit. The cartoon was also, I think, aimed at a significantly younger audience than the original games were. And yeah. I mean that the games were sort of targeted at just sort of the general gaming audience as it existed in the 1990s. The cartoon was definitely, and I enjoyed the cartoon as a kid because I was still at that age where I would go into something and just sort of take it as it is. But I think would have been like 1997, you were at that perfect age where not only were you going to like be put off by anything that was like targeted so obviously at children, you were going to be, if it was something you cared a lot about, you were going to feel this feeling of betrayal over it.
And I never cared about anything to the extent that I cared about Donkey Kong Country. As I've said, I've never had a property that kind of just hit me in all the right spots. I've been a hardcore fan of many things by that point, but it never felt like something was made specifically for me until Donkey Kong Country came along.
Because you had these expectations for it and you knew what it could have been.
Yeah.
And I can totally relate to that. Like, I think the DKC cartoon probably hit you in a lot of the same way that something like Sonic Heroes hit me. And accordingly, now you see people are surprised to learn that fans in 2004 did not like Sonic Heroes.
Yeah, and it's amazing, like, how many people are still shocked that I don't like the cartoon. Well, you're DK Vine, you're Mr. Donkey Kong. How do you not like the Donkey Kong Country cartoon?
Right.
I was like, I've talked about this actually for 3 decades now.
Right.
Across 3 decades, I have had to talk about this. So,
but like over time, people calm down. The zeitgeist changes. A new generation comes up, and that I think people will always. I think fans, especially fans of children's properties, not just children's properties, quote unquote, but things that at least partially target kids. There's always going to be a contingent on the internet that just tears into anything new.
Yeah, that's true.
But that stuff sort of just falls down the memory hole in about 10 years.
Just like people will love the Star Wars sequels. People will love Rise of Skywalker.
Oh, yeah.
In 10 to 15 years. It's gonna happen. Like, deal with it. I remember people hated Return of the Jedi. Return of the Jedi was the bad one, right? Now it's just like, it's part of the original trilogy. It is, everybody loves it. Return of the Jedi. How could you not love it? Like, but people hated the Ewoks.
Yeah. I've heard that before. You could always, there was this generational gap in just a couple of years between Star Wars fans who loved the first 2 movies and didn't like the third one.
And there are Star Wars fans who hated Empire, there are some Star Wars fans who literally the first one, which we now know as A New Hope, is the only acceptable Star Wars movie. No, Darth Vader is not Luke's father. That's nonsense. That's a stupid retcon.
Return of the Jedi is the DKC3 of Star Wars, says Captain Cheesebag in the chat.
It is. It totally is. Even though the Ewok village was in the first one, but it does have a lot of bears.
That's true, yeah.
So the other major point, and I don't have much to say about this, is that Donkey Kong does have a home now at EPD. We haven't seen the fruit of that. Let me rephrase this analogy. Donkey Kong has a home and he's planted a tree, and the tree is growing, and it hasn't bore fruit yet in this tree in his new front yard at Nintendo EPD Acres. But you got to give it time for the fruit to grow, and it's going to be a bountiful harvest.
This is beginning to sound like the analogy on the back of the GameCube box.
Oh my god. We all live long enough to see ourselves become Miyamoto, or we die the hero. No, I mean, I know there's doubt. There's been doubt instilled because this rumor, it's not a rumor, it's happening, but that this story that DK Vine's been talking about for a couple of years got roped into the E3 hype cycle this year by clickbaity artists and leakers and then legitimate news sites. I realize that it was inescapable, that as soon as that became the case, there was going to be disappointment, and people who maybe just heard about this for the first time based on the major news sites covering it then, we're going to just like immediately dismiss it when it doesn't happen, because we have short-term memories, because if you're not a hardcore Donkey Kong fan, if you don't listen to the Kongversation every week, you're gonna forget about this. And so I get that, but you're just gonna have to take my word for it. It's still happening. Especially now, like, I haven't been given any more, like, leaks about this project, right? Like, so I don't know if it's 2D or 3D. I don't know any of that, but you look at the news of the past 2 weeks, of course it's still happening. Like, the EPD wouldn't have just a bit, like, you know what? We can't find a good hook for Donkey Kong. Just junk it. Just throw it in the garbage. You look at the millions of dollars that are being sunk into Donkey Kong right now in Hollywood, in Osaka, in Orlando, wherever, and you're like, yeah, a game is coming. It's like we don't even need leaks at this point. It's transparently happening. And between that and like Donkey Kong having its own merchandising wing of Nintendo, like I've said, like everything shifted around 2017, 2018. And it took a while to see the writing on the wall. I'm just throwing in every analogy I can think of at this point. It took a while to see that writing on the wall, but I think it's blinding now. It's been written with like neon paint. It's coming back. The 90s are coming back in every way. We got neon now.
Well, that being said, I do want to say, I understand and I can relate to the feeling that it's harder to feel that way when there is still uncertainty, when whatever this is still hasn't been announced. If the 90s are coming back, I guess what I'm saying is, I feel your pain, baby. But
oh no.
That was the worst Clinton impression I've ever done.
Mine has
and I've never done
bad.
a good one, so holy shit.
Mine is atrophied to the point where it's essentially a dead appendage. Steve McCorkle of Rare Gamer does a spot on one that'll pull out something, and I'm just like, well, yeah, I can't do it anymore in light of his. But
like earlier today, actually, I was trying out the new Donk City course in Mario Golf, in the new Mario Golf game for Switch. And I found myself playing as Donkey Kong, going into like one of the time trial modes, hitting the ball, and then just running off and like platforming around. Because like, so thirsty am I for an actual new Donkey Kong game.
No.
That like, just the idea of being able to play as Donkey Kong running around New Donk City is exciting.
That
and what is ostensibly supposed to be a golf game.
that takes me back to Mario Kart 64, where I would just go off Royal Raceway around the castle grounds as Donkey Kong, being like, oh my god, I'm Donkey Kong in Super Mario 64. It's like I'm Donkey Kong in a 3D platformer. Oh, because I was so ready for that Donkey Kong in 64 game that I was angry at Banjo-Kazooie when it was announced, and Conker. Yeah, and I hated them. I hated them because Rare was betraying me by making these games. There's a lesson in there, again, people. There's a lesson in there. Banjo fans who hate whenever Rare does something that's not Banjo. I'm just saying. I hated Banjo once upon a time.
And I think a lot of this is just really easy for us to say because, as we said at the beginning of this episode, we've been through the buyout, and not only have we been through the buyout, we were engaged with the fandom, we were engaged with the internet, we were engaged with the zeitgeist at the time, and so it's very easy for us to look back on ourselves and kind of be like, man, you know, we were kind of we were making a lot of mountains out of molehills back in those days.
We were,
not
but
that
again,
the criticism was unwarranted at all times, but the amount of personal stakes that we put into it.
You got me there. Yeah, I was just thinking back to the drama and hysterics of they're not even going to put Donkey Kong in Super Smash Brothers Brawl. They're not going to do it. Yeah, and yeah, at the time when we held that interview, that mistranslated interview with the Jungle Beat creators as, you know, basically canon. Canon to the actual history of the world.
It was taken as like the definitive mission statement for how Nintendo itself saw Donkey Kong Country.
Yeah, and while it was like outside studios like Payon could get away with it, right? Like Nintendo was gonna like choke Donkey Kong, and to an extent though, like their ethos of, you know, each team should create their own concepts and creations. And then that leads to so many classic characters getting squeezed out of retros games. There is some truth to that. I'm not trying to say there isn't, but we were being overly dramatic about it. And now, like I said, like the buyout era was so much better than we gave it credit for. But I'm saying this era that we're in now is so much better than the buyout era because we have that direction. And we also have Donkey Kong Country fans reportedly working on the new Donkey Kong game, like people who grew up with the games like us, who fell in love with it. You see, look at New Donk City and those references in there. Like we have a Rattly the Rattlesnake reference in New Donk City. What? Rattly? Ingard couldn't even get into Donkey Kong Country Returns.
I remember when Tropical Freeze was revealed and we saw swimming, and it was just like, I mean, Ingard's definitely going to be in it then, right?
Yeah. There are other reasons to be happy too. There are other things we look at. Like I mentioned the new Donk references and where we can kind of jump off from there as far as the level of characters returning in the EPD game. And I don't know who's going to be in it, but there's no longer that fear, right? Like, well, we can't go that deep into the well. We have to keep the surface level. Who is most vitally important? You're still going to get that, but they're not going to be so fearful about referencing things because they realize now Donkey Kong does have its fans and we are fans of the characters. That's the biggest thing that the ballot did for us, the Smash ballot, and them seeing the support for King K. Rool, who they'd written off. They didn't think he mattered, right, to Donkey Kong fans. And when they saw that, I think it did galvanize a contingent at Nintendo EPD who were fans of it too, and they were like, "This is our chance." And I'm this is me just spitballing here. I mean, this isn't anything I am privy to, but you know, it definitely makes sense, right? Like, if the fact of the matter is K. Rool effectively won the ballot, or was one of the winners of the ballot, then all of a sudden that gives the entire cast of that era this new level of credibility in certain people's eyes who make these decisions, and the people who maybe wouldn't have been able to get them in before now have a lot more say. And it's like, yeah, let's reference Radley. Let's throw in a reference to Tiny Kong. Why can't we? There are fans of this. We see that with the ballot. K. Rool returned in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And now K. Rool is this major, major icon of Nintendo, of gaming. Josh, 4 years ago, that would have been unthinkable. Like,
yeah, absolutely.
We would have hoped for it, and I don't think it really resonates with outside fandoms. Like, it would be like if Eggman was not in a Sonic game for like 15 years.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, Eggman was very consistently usurped as the final boss and not taken as a threat for about 10 years. But
sure,
I guess,
but they still used them.
They did. There's a balance I really want to try to strike here in talking to the people who are feeling disillusioned. I guess it's one of those things where, like I said earlier, it's easy for us to say, guys, this has happened before. We've been through this. Don't worry. It's all going to work out. It's going to be okay. But I can kind of understand, like, for example, if you right now could talk to yourself in the mid-2000s and sort of tell yourself, this is going to happen, this is the way it's going to go, these poor, like, Jungle Beat is so much better than you think it is. The ports that are coming out right now are going to make a whole new generation of Donkey Kong Country fans. Would that have done much of, if anything, to curtail the way that you felt?
Yes and no. Mm-hmm. I think, for one thing, it would be like, what do you mean I have to wait that long?
Yeah, for sure.
like the gulf of time, even at that age, to the present day would have seemed like an eternity.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'd be like, wait, so like, what do you mean I have to wait until 2018 to get another Donkey Kong character in Smash Bros?
You have to wait, like, not just until the next Smash game, but until the one after that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I could have calmed myself down, but it's just,
I guess what I'm saying is, to a certain extent, it's easy for us to sit here and look back on how we used to be and how the fandom used to be and the things that we used to feel and kind of be, I don't know, maybe too hastily dismissive of the passion that we felt both for ill and for good.
Yeah.
But to a certain extent, the reason we don't feel that way anymore is the experience, is just having that experience. The remedy is the experience, to now move my references past the 1990s. And I guess, let's see, I had somewhere I was going with that before I got sidetracked by Jason Mraz.
Oh, I thought it was Jason Mr. Az. I badass Billy Guns to bring him back.
We didn't work him, me and Bart did.
So yeah, I mean, I get what you're saying, and you're right. Like, it is just, it's kind of experience you have to have yourself.
And for that matter, I remember what it was, sorry. The balance that we need to strike here is, for example, just because it is almost certainly the case, for example, to take it back to Star Wars, that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, we will have a generation of people who fondly look back on the sequel trilogy and hold it in the same reverence that everyone does, doesn't mean that criticism of the sequel trilogy is in some way meaningless or invalid or doesn't count.
Yeah.
Like, it is perfectly okay to criticize media regardless of how or whether children right now are going to like it.
Yeah, I think, like, my point with this episode, I don't want to say that people's feelings are invalid, because a lot of this is, like, your own personal journey, and you have to kind of get there yourself. You can be told, like, oh, it's this way, and you don't have to feel this way, but it's something that a lot of people just have to kind of find their own internal compass for and find their own direction. And you're right, because even if I had gone back in time and told the me of the mid-aughts that everything was going to work out essentially in the long run, it still would have seemed like this remote thing that I kind of have to see for myself. And I'm glad that I didn't have future me coming back, because I needed to kind of have that growth to get to where I am now. And I need to have those stumbles along the way. It's just part of the human experience. The great, if there is any grand spiritual meaning to why, like just why are we here? I think it is that journey, not to get all, hippy dippy woo woo on you, but it's my belief when I'm, I don't know, walking through the forest and I feel really connected to everything. I'm like, this is the reason. And I'll have to share this on my podcast about Donkey Kong.
Dude, but, I appreciate that. That sort of thing is something that I think for the first time in my life I've really struggled with, going through the pandemic and going through lockdown and being so cut off from everybody. So the fact that we can wax philosophical about the meaning of life this way on a Donkey Kong podcast, and how meaningful the journey is genuinely something that feels good to me.
I mean, yeah, anybody who plays Donkey Kong Country and feels those feelings in, Coral Capers or Bramble Scramble, like those are the feelings I feel when I'm out in nature too. And so I have these great philosophical thoughts, and it's why I could never be completely removed from just very clinically minded, right? I'm always thinking, this grander, like, well, maybe this is why we're here, and rather than we're just all a bunch of biological organisms who make a mess of things and die. Like, no, there's a grander narrative to it, and I think it's ultimately to become better individuals, better embers in this grand cosmos. But yeah, I mean, you're right.
To pull it back a little, there's no way that I could go back and convince my 18-year-old self not to be personally offended by the way that WWE was positioning John Cena. But had I not gone through that experience, I wouldn't be able to relate to the way that people feel about things now. And I never would have gotten to the point that I am now, where I can see that was actually a really good idea. That actually made a lot of sense in the long run. But I didn't have a perspective to see it that way.
Yeah, you might say you couldn't see him back then. Might say that. I wouldn't. That's low-hanging fruit. But moving beyond just Donkey Kong, if you're just in it for Donkey Kong, right? Okay. We've listed out all the reasons, and I think it's a pretty solid case why we should keep the faith. But there's also the Donkey Kong universe to consider, Josh. And the fact that in 2019, I know 2019 seems like this distant remote thing that the pandemic sort of nullified, but 2019, Nintendo acknowledged Banjo-Kazooie's connection to Donkey Kong. And Banjo-Kazooie got into Smash Brothers in a DKU-themed trailer. Holy hell.
Yeah.
Holy hell. In 2019, this happened. We're a long way removed from when Rare was writing about Conker being Diddy Kong's friend on their website, right? 2019, Nintendo has a trailer where Banjo and Kazooie show up in the Congo jungle, and Donkey and Diddy and K. Rool are like, yeah. What?
Yeah, that was huge. And then I always think of that shot at not the very end, not the coda, but near the end of that trailer where Banjo and Kazooie are posing in front of like all these other video game icons. Most of them Nintendo themed, and just how much that brought me back to like what we saw, like for example on Nintendo's websites in the 2000s, where this series and these characters were positioned in such a similar way.
Yeah, they were big league Nintendo IPs for like 4 years.
Yeah, it seemed like longer to us at the time, though.
It did. Um, and like the fact that Nintendo can recognize the DKU even in such a small way and in concert with Rare, like it means a lot to me. Let me explain this concept I've been kicking around in my head, right? I call it the spheres of canon.
Okay.
All right. So it's a way for fans to understand the way the studios and companies view the DKU. Okay. So the inner core of the spheres, that's Donkey Kong and Nintendo. Okay. That is like held as the canon for all outer spheres. Right. So in the sphere that's just outside of that, we have, a rare canon that Nintendo acknowledges affects Donkey Kong, and that's Banjo-Kazooie. And you could even make the case, I maybe wouldn't, but maybe make the case for Rare's Dinosaur Planet Mythology and Star Fox in that layer of canon. And then we have the inner outer core. That's what I just said. So then we have the middle core outside of that. That's Rare's shared universe. Conker, Ghoulies, Mr. Pants, Viva Pinata, Sea of Thieves, so on. Mm-hmm. And so everything, like, Rare would acknowledge Donkey Kong and everything outside of that, but Nintendo wouldn't acknowledge any of that, right? So to Nintendo, like, Conker, whatever, doesn't count. But to Rare, like, that's an extra layer they can add on to it. And then we have the outermost core, and that's now Platonic. And Platonic sort of acknowledges everything in the spheres beneath it. So DK Vine views the Platonic core, the outer core, as the canon we embrace and adopt. But I feel like I just went off the rails there.
I'm confused as to why your metaphor isn't reliant. You're using like cores and circles. I feel like it should be banana shaped.
I just really want Donkey Kong to punch it. I just want to see if I can get him to just hate the idea so much he punches it. No, because it's like, okay, so I wouldn't expect Rare to reference ukulele in Sea of Thieves. That would be nonsense, right?
Right.
But Platonic has acknowledged Banjo and Conker and Donkey Kong in their properties. So it's just a way of viewing the different layers, and where you fall into a particular sphere indicates like how expansive of a fan you are, sure. Right? So you might just be in the Donkey Kong sphere, like that's all that matters to me. But maybe you're in that inner outer sphere where it's kind of like Banjo, which Nintendo sort of acknowledges now as being related to Donkey Kong, but anyway. Mm-hmm. But we have that connection, right? We have that connection reestablished, even if it was just for this brief game. But that's still so meaningful to me, to everybody of that generation, to the people who might pull up the Internet Archive and go back to the Wayback Machine and view Nintendo's website circa 2000 and absolutely pine for that time. We got it back, even if it's just in this one game. And I'm always going to be grateful for that. Go back and watch our reaction video from that E3. It was me, Cameron, Jeff, Mitchell, all sitting on the couch together. Those tears were real. Like none of that was put on. Because it really did hit us. Like, oh my God, like our childhoods have just been validated at long last.
And I think that's what's sort of difficult to connect to, maybe, if you didn't grow up with that Nintendo, is that like being able to see Banjo and Kazooie standing there alongside, like being acknowledged in the same breath as Donkey Kong, having their trailer so like mirror K rules and like the acknowledgement of what that would mean to people of like in our age group. Like it felt like the Nintendo that you grew up with that you never thought you were really going to see again was kind of made whole again.
Even in the humor deployed, like Donkey Kong scratching his ass and just like just the stuff that like Nintendo's kind of like washed out when they became super corporate, when they got a haircut, Oh,
I don't think Nintendo under Iwata was like super corporate. per se. If anything, I would say they're more corporate now than they were then.
Sure. I just associate it like, oh, they changed their logo to just gray.
Yeah.
A gray Nintendo logo.
Yeah, that whole Wii era.
When I think of like the colors, when you just like think in terms of colors to a particular era, like I imagine the 90s is like purple and green and like just there's all sorts of like extreme coloring, and I picture the mid-aughts era Nintendo and like into the Wii era as gray.
Mm-hmm.
Just gray. Just the fog. But yeah, that is a reason to be excited. And also, I don't think we can undersell just the different position that Rare is in these days compared to where they were in the buyout era. I know not all of you are into Sea of Thieves, but Sea of Thieves is now Rare's most successful game, like ever. You know? And I think like that is just crazy. That is like, they've come a long way from Grab by the Ghoulies absolutely bombing on the Xbox.
Yeah, for sure.
And Sea of Thieves, they just made references to the Kremlins. Like there are so many references to the Kremlins in the new game update, and it's just like little cheeky like puns like crocodile core and like saying like these weapons were like in so many words built on Crocodile Isle, and just like incorporating where they can little nods here or there for us, you know. It's so cool. And then we've got Platonic, and Platonic I think makes so much of like Rare making things like Sea of Thieves and maybe not making that next Banjo game that fans have. Well, at least you have Platonic, right? And they just in 2019 again came out with what is effectively a variant Donkey Kong Country 4. Like, imagine if key members of the DKC teams made a sequel to DKC 3. Yooka-Laylee and Impossible Lair is one of the best platformers I've ever played. And we've got that in just like the last 2 years.
Man, I am like, just hearing this is making me, cause we talked like 2019 seems like much longer ago than it really is. I'm like, man, yeah. I want to play Impossible Lair again.
Yeah. I mean, this is not the buyout era Redux. We had more games in the buyout era, but And Gibbon has brought up like Nintendo's whole philosophy in that era, as you kind of alluded to earlier, Josh, was more scattershot. It was like, let's be different with this generation. Let's do different things. But also, where we never,
I think it's a major factor too when you're sort of comparing the output of the Donkey Kong series or Rare's games in that era to this one, or I guess really just the video game market in general, is that the market has changed a lot in the past 15 years or so. And the things that, like, primarily I think a huge factor that people sometimes I think sweep under the rug a little bit, and they just say, oh, why doesn't Nintendo want to make these games? How come we used to get so many more? Is just like, how much more expensive video game development is now, and also how much of sort of the budget that used to go into like making spin-offs or making smaller games or making more budget titles now tends to go into the mobile market.
Yeah. No, it's true.
That's something I really noticed a couple of years ago. My wife and I got into collecting GBA games for a summer. And going to retro shops and digging through there, like the amount of like movie tie-in games and like shovelware
Yes.
that used to exist, like you don't really get a whole lot of games like that anymore, because the market has changed so much.
It feels like games have to matter more, if that makes any sense. But you also didn't have the indie market, the indie gaming market that you have. Like Steam is a game changer, and just all these digital marketplaces on the big consoles, game changers. We wouldn't have been able to have Platonic 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And it was a Rare that was struggling to find its place in a rapidly changing marketplace, still doing things like they did it in the 90s. now we have a Rare that's kind of evolved, and from Rare's evolution, we got Playtonic, which as an indie studio can still kind of do things the old way, in a way that fits them, benefits them, and, you know, it financially turns a profit.
And I think
they're
that's
also publishing games now.
I think that's why, like, you bring up Playtonic, like, from a certain perspective of anything that we've talked about, like, because I don't know what Playtonic's working on, but I think that's why I'm almost, in a sense, knowing nothing about anything that's coming, already preemptively looking forward to whatever it is they're working on more than anything else that might be out there, because I'm more confident that it's going to appeal, like, to my tastes, more so than I am anything else.
I think Impossible Lair was such a brilliant second game because it dispelled all of the question marks around Yooka-Laylee, like the original game, like. Well, because it was a divisive game, and what Impossible Lair did was it was just this brilliant, genius game that scratched all of the itches that a fan of 2D platforms would want scratched, and evolved it in a way. It had something to say rather than we are just making a game like that game.
Right.
It actually said something new and contributed something new to the genre, and felt like it built off a skeleton that they had already been building on in the 90s. You don't build on skeletons, they decompose. But you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
The reverse skeleton.
It felt like it felt authentically in this, like, an evolution of the Donkey Kong Country, like, original trilogy formula, in a way that you can sometimes only really get out of the original creators who've spent, decades ruminating on this.
Yeah, and I love Returns in Tropical Freeze, and I never want this to turn into Returns in Tropical Freeze v Impossible Lair. Like, what's the better one? Because Impossible Lair clearly took some influence from Retro's games too.
Absolutely.
But as far as the overworld goes, the quote unquote map screen, that is exactly coming out of DKC 3 what I would want DKC 4's overworld to be like. Just keep, because that's where DKC 3 really innovated, right? Was the map screen and what you could do on it. And it kind of took a page out of Super Mario Worlds, but I think, they both had something to say, but I think Impossible Lair just took both concepts and just like went to town on it and basically made a top-down adventure game as the map screen. And it just, I adore that game. And I would say that even if I wasn't a character in it, that doesn't influence my opinion whatsoever. But my point being,
I am not a character in it, and I love it.
There you go. That's why you're here, Josh. Because I couldn't invite Cameron on this episode. He's a character. I couldn't invite Jeff. He's a character. Like we're too deep.
Mostly I just couldn't come up with a Geek Critique B pun.
Yeah, we're getting close to 3 hours. I can't think of puns at all right now.
Perfect time for a 15-minute B pun intermission.
Maybe a P intermission. Because of the bladder situation. No, I want to tie it all together, though, because no matter where in the spheres of canonicity you fall into, there are reasons to be excited right now for Donkey Kong and the Donkey Kong universe. I think everything is firing on all cylinders. There's another metaphor in there for you. It's such an exciting time, whether you're a Donkey Kong fan, whether you're an expanded Donkey Kong universe fan, or you're just a fan of the creators who made the games way back when. There is something in the works for everyone right now. And yeah, I just want us to kind of remember that when we're feeling down, when we have those moments of doubt in the dead of night, or we look at what's trending on Twitter and it's not Donkey Kong and we feel bad about it. We will be trending on Twitter again, friends. Like and we will be trending more and more and more. There are so many good things happening. Don't let the trauma of the past affect your future, learn from it, and kind of process it, and tomorrow will be a lot sunnier, I guess.
And if you get disheartened, I mean, the demographics of Twitter are also just they're very specific to Twitter. I ran a Twitter poll the other day just for my own my own enlightenment, like pitting the GameCube against the N64, and the GameCube handily won that one. But then you go on like GameFAQs.com, and they ran a poll I think last year asking something similar, and the Super Nintendo ran away with it.
Yeah, so none of this is scientific. Yeah, it's demographic. None of it's scientific. If you went to TikTok, I'm sure the Wii U would run away with it, yeah. or like
the Zoomers love the Wii U, right? I'm just gonna keep pretending that's the case.
It's just funny because TT was never on the Wii U. His name is TikTok, Josh. I don't know if you. Okay, so anyway, we have some calls. Let's play them. I'll play one at a time. We'll talk about it. And then we'll wrap it all up with some hugs. Cause, we're vaxxed. We can hug each other. I still won't go to a movie theater, but I will hug you, Josh. And we'll send out the good vibes to everybody. All right. Let's play this first call.
Hello, Hyle. Hello, Josh. I was very excited when I heard that you guys were going to do an episode of the Kongversation talking about why there's reason to be hopeful for a new Donkey Kong game, things of that nature. The podcast you did back in May, the Heard Any Good Rumors one, is one of my all-time favorites. I really appreciate you guys kind of like keeping positive spirits and hopes up, as we still haven't gotten any official confirmation for this new game. And I just, as someone who hasn't listened to the conversation for a long period of time, I just got into it recently. I'm free candy on the forums, and I dabble here and there. I haven't been a member too long, but I don't post that often. I lurk a lot more than I post. I've been kind of catching up on old episodes, and I just want to thank you for everything you do. Both Hyle for everything you do for DKU, and Josh, I really enjoy your Geek Critique videos as well. I don't have a question or anything per se. I'm just really looking forward to the episode and you guys talking about all the things that are going on with Donkey Kong and why there's reason to be hopeful. And thanks again for keeping the positive vibes going, and guys have a great day. Thanks. Bye.
Well, thank you for the call. Free candy. And I don't know if that's like Liberate Candy Kong or if it's like the creepy clown way, but either way, great to have you.
Yeah, what an incredibly kind caller.
Yeah,
thank you so much.
Thank you,
and you have a great day too.
Yeah, thanks for sending the good vibes our way. All right, let's play the next call.
Hey there, Hyle. It's Jebaha. So I saw that you were going to be doing the episode about where we are in the states of the Donkey Kong universe, Donkey Kong Country, all that good stuff. And I just wanted to say I'm kind of in the same spot of just being really excited about what's going on and what all the developments are. And, after seeing the Metroid Dread trailer at E3, for some reason it made me even more optimistic for our future because it shows me that Nintendo is paying attention to what's going on, and at least to some degree. So I hope we can get the same kind of treatment for our series, and I'm really excited to see what's going to come down the pipeline, and I'm really happy to be a Donkey Kong fan these days.
Thanks for the call, Jebaha. I don't know if you heard it, Josh, but it sounded like there was some sort of tropical bird in the background of that call. And I'm like, is Jebaha already there in Super Nintendo World, Donkey Kong Country? Sounds like it. Sounds like maybe he's in a rainforest cafe. I don't know. But, Metroid Dread is a good point, because I hate this animosity, which is almost forced at this point, between the Metroid fandom and the Donkey Kong fandom. We're not natural enemies. The only reason this has been built up is because Retro Studios made games for both, and for whatever reason that, meant if they're working on one, they can't be working on another. Fight, like here's a sharpened stick. You fight over retro now. Very territorial Nintendo fans, and this is why it's ultimately a good thing that Donkey Kong will have a kind of permanent base of operations again. As they said on the last episode, as we said on the last episode, and as they say on the DK Vine forum, Donkey Kong has just been kind of crashing on people's couches for the past 20 years. And because of that, he's been crashing on couches that are in living rooms that were already claimed, like Metroid, right? Or, claimed by the fans. Or Retro's Metroid's studio. You can't, Donkey Kong, what are you doing here? Get out. Being an EPD circumvents all of that drama, because EPD is enormous. There's so many EPD teams. And they're all dedicated towards keeping these franchises, keeping the torch alive. Retro kept the torch burning for most of the 2010s, but I think now this is going to be more of an eternal flame rather than like a oil-soaked rag on a stick.
It's just sort of hit me that by the time a lot of people are hearing this, I'm probably playing Dread right now.
Yeah.
Man, that's exciting.
And so, and it took that long to get Metroid Dread. And it's not like we're going to be getting Donkey Kong Racing, because that's very uniquely tied to Rare, but, hope springs eternal. Crazier things have happened in getting Metroid Dread to our own fandom in just the last couple of years.
Yeah, if Dread can happen, if Sonic Mania can happen, there's no reason that eventually someday, forever's a long time.
Yeah.
Donkey Kong Racing can happen.
If K. Rool and Smash Brothers can happen.
Yeah, exactly.
If
Banjo-Kazooie and Smash Brothers can happen.
And here's the thing, if Nintendo gets Donkey Kong on solid, ground again, solid footing again, who knows, they might go back and say, that trailer, 83 2001, that was a great concept. What if we revisit that ourselves? Yeah. It won't be exactly the same. Taj the Genie won't be there. But you know what? It would still be pretty cool. So, you never know. Thank you for the call.
Thank you.
Hey, this is Jeff's friend, G-Mancer, and my question is, what if I was a very old school fan of the DK series / franchise? What if, hypothetically, let's say I was famous Kongversation character Jeff's grandfather, also known as Jeff's grandpa? What would I have to be excited about the new generation of Donkey Kong in the future? Thank you.
G-Man, you're an interesting cat. What can I say?
Shouldn't you be harassing Gordon Freeman?
I think G-Man's question is, if you're a fan of the arcade Donkey Kong, and if we're saying Donkey Kong Country is obviously the direction that everything's headed as the brand identity, what's in it for you? If you were there 40 years ago in arcades, pushing quarters into machines, are you being left behind for those damn 90s kids?
Yeah, these damn millennials. Reminds me of that story you told of that guy at, I believe it was GameStop, who was excited about Mario vs. Donkey Kong because he was like, they're finally bringing back the real Donkey Kong.
Yeah. Man, I had a lot of bad experiences at GameStop from that era. Like, they tried to get me to not reserve Star Fox Adventure. Jesus. Fuck.
Oh my God, really?
Yeah. I'm not gonna go down that path again. That path leads to tears. So I ultimately reserved it at Circuit City, Josh. Remember Circuit City?
I do remember. I liked Circuit City a lot, actually.
Red Best Buy, yeah.
Yep.
Just Best Buy, but red. Yeah, so this is a great question, actually. And I feel like what we have to go off of is things like Super Mario Odyssey and Mario Kart Tour, oddly enough. So I feel like where Nintendo is going to keep the arcade imagery alive is through kind of retro throwbacks and homages. You're going to still see arcade stuff because it is absolutely vital to the identity of Donkey Kong. Even if Donkey Kong Country is sort of the brand going forward, you're still going to have the arcade stuff referenced all the time. Mm-hmm. And I think, weirdly enough, by embracing that aspect with Cranky's character, you're going to see a lot more of it because they're going to be able to do it in a lot more freeing way, acknowledging that, yeah, this is the original arcade Donkey Kong, in a way that maybe you didn't in the aughts when they were trying to dance around it and have it both ways, where like, oh, the modern Donkey Kong is fighting Mario and Mario versus Donkey Kong. I think you've seen it deployed in like Odyssey, where Mario fights a sprite of arcade Donkey Kong, right? You've seen it in Mario Kart Tour, where Donkey Kong Jr. is brought back as a playable character, but he's this Super Nintendo sprite. He doesn't have a modern model. So like whenever those aspects of the arcade era come back, they're going to be almost like pulled back from the past. Like they're almost like time traveling.
And that's
right?
That's sort of where my brain went to. It's the fact if a fan of the arcade era Donkey Kong wants something to be excited about, the very fact that in the Mario movie, it's not just going to be Donkey Kong making an appearance, but Cranky Kong as well, I think speaks extremely well to the possibility of how that will be portrayed.
Now, if you don't like Rare's evolution of the canon, the original Donkey Kong being Cranky Kong, you're gonna hate this. You're gonna hate the future.
If you're an angry NES kid from the mid 2000s, yes.
Yeah, if you were that person at GameStop who was giving me shit,
yeah,
cry some more.
And that's the thing, man. But I don't think there are a whole lot of people like that. Let me put it like this. There are definitely still people who prefer the arcade Donkey Kong, but there aren't people who are angry and cynical and like pissed off at the very concept that Donkey Kong could ever be anything else anymore. And I think that's like what we've been talking about throughout the whole episode. That's sort of how and why this cycle perpetuates, is because the part, like where we are now is where like the arcade Donkey Kong fandom was circa 2010 when DKC Returns came out, where like they have the perspective now to know that, okay, well, this isn't exactly catering to us, but like, that's okay. We've been through this before. We can accept it we'll accept this on its own merits. And, I think that's a large part. Like there's always a new group of people going through this,
Yeah. And all we can do as an older, experienced generation is try to give them a helping hand along the way. Maybe they won't stumble quite as much as we did. I think the arcade era will continue to be embraced, because here's the great thing. That experience I had in a 2003 GameStop, right? Mm-hmm. That's not the case anymore. I don't think there is any rivalry between arcade era fans and country era fans. I think we've come together as one fandom. And I think like we acknowledge the arcade era as a vital part of the history. And I think a lot of the arcade fans, even if they're only into the arcade games, well, they'll always have those, right? And so they're never going to get Donkey Kong 4 with the return of Stanley the Bugman and whatever. But you're still going to have that era celebrated, and you're going to have the arcade games continually ported and brought back. And I would love to see, one of those 1-up arcade machines, but for Donkey Kong. I would totally buy one of those. I'm not even a big arcade era fan, and I would still love to have one of those. But, it's going to be continued to be embraced and homaged, and you're going to see references, and you might even get, a throwback every now and then. Cause I'm not going to say the Mario vs. Donkey Kong series is even dead, we could see a throwback to that, but I think it'll be done in a lot more of a considerate way for what the brand is. And you're going to have like that. Yeah, like it would be great to have Mario versus Donkey Kong, but it actually being Cranky Kong, right? And we could actually have that. Who knows? But I think all era of Donkey Kong fans will be represented going forward, whether it's arcade, whether it's rare, whether it's buyout era. I don't know if like Hoofer or Orko will ever come back, but I think, retro is definitely going to be well taken care of. And then into the EPD era where there will be new fans and older fans will complain about certain aspects here or there, but that's just evolution. That's just generations. Thank you for the call, G-Man.
Thank you very much.
Hey, Hyle and Josh. This is Thomas of the Kremlin Campaigners. First, wanted to extend my thanks for consistently putting out such great discussions. I've been in the middle of marathon training for a few months now and in need of audio material to stay sane on the longer runs. So it's been a godsend getting to go back and listen to some of the older conversations. The episodes you two have been on together tend to be among my favorites just because of the dynamic you guys have and the perspectives you bring to the table on different fandoms. With this episode, I wanted to commend you for taking the time to look on the bright side where Donkey Kong's future is concerned. Speaking from personal experience, it's easy for fans to overlook the major good things we've got coming up because you don't know how exactly they're going to look. We've been aware of them for so long that they feel as though they've almost become part of the status quo. But it's an intentional choice to keep on putting out a positive outlook as we wait for more info. That's something Eric and I have done a good amount of reflection on as of late, in an area where we want to do better in following DK Vine's example. I think it's still worth questioning how DK is handled and discussed in the present, but moving forward, I personally want to resolve to treat minor grievances more proportionately with a more positive overall tenor. At the end of the day, we have so much to be thankful for as DK fans. How many fan bases can say they have the triple crown of a new game, a theme park, and a potential animated movie on the horizon? Hyle, your comment that this is going to be the decade of Donkey Kong is totally apt. And it's going to be with Donkey Kong Country as the brand. Just thinking ahead to how joyful everyone's going to be once we see what's up ahead is enough to bring a smile to my face right now. That's why I don't especially care if, Kremlings don't have a significant presence at the theme park or if a potential DK movie is any good. When big picture perspective is, they're going to bring in generations of new fans to enjoy our series along with us. Over the long term, things are going to be okay. I take that back if the Final Smash character isn't three Fedora Kongs standing on each other's shoulders and wearing a trench coat, but we will cross that bridge when we get to it. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Hey, thanks for the call, Thomas of the Kremlin Campaigners.
Thanks a lot. You guys do great work, too.
Yeah, and I know it's easy to get worn down by the day-to-day, right? Like, especially when you've been in the trenches for so long. And, you, particularly, you were, like, leading the charge for the K-Roll campaign. And we got that. And, then the shine kind of wears off, and K-Rool being back just becomes this accepted thing. This almost like it will never not be humdrum for me. It will never not be like it'll never turn into this thing where it becomes mundane that K-Rool is back. But we've been living with K-Rool back for 3 years now, and so It does kind of become this thing where it's like, well, what's next? What's next? And when you're like running a social media account that has thousands of followers, and they look to you to say something, sometimes it's just hard. It's hard, especially when you don't have anything new to share except keep the faith, keep the faith, keep the faith. And then you see everybody crumbling around you. And then it's like, how do you keep the faith when, everything falls on you?
Yeah,
but
man, I can absolutely relate to that. Like, it can be difficult, like how much, if you're too plugged into like the zeitgeist and the discourse and the consensus, especially on social media, it can be really hard for that to not affect your perspective.
It's also hard when you know things that the general public does not, because you still listen to the general public, and yes, it can shape your perception of things, even though you know. So it's weird. It's just like this weird, like Schrodinger's cat, where you're both optimistic and pessimistic at the exact same time.
This is something that I had a media course that focused a lot on advertising and just public relations in college. And one of the things that the professor would always say is like, the news can't tell you what to think, but it can tell you what to think about. And I think that that's especially applicable to like social media and like fandom discourse, because like there have been games that I've played and on my own I've enjoyed them, and I've had some problems, but like I haven't like gotten too into them. But then I get online and like the discourse surrounding them is just so ugly and so negative, and that ends up being what you focus on, and that ends up coloring your perception.
Yeah, for example, Star Wars.
Yeah.
I loved The Last Jedi. I left the theater and I was like, oh my God, I think that might have been my favorite Star Wars since The Empire Strikes Back. That was fantastic. And I got online because I was like, I can't wait to share this with the world. And I got online and I was just like, was I wrong? Oh, I was wrong. Oh no, I was wrong. And yeah, you're right. Like, it's funny. Like, if we lived in a vacuum, how different would our opinions be if we didn't have the opinions of others to like wear us down and chip away at what we think and what we feel. And you know, everybody's entitled to their opinions. I'm not saying like one opinion is more right than the other, but
like negativity tends to be dense, and it also tends to follow a lot, like it tends to travel a lot further on social media. Like social media sites want you to spend as much time as possible like using their platform and engaged on their platform, and one of the best ways to do that is to make you mad, unfortunately,
and that is like the ugly secret of not just social media but also like clickbait sites, like Gawker media sites, where like they are designed to outrage you. And unfortunately, there isn't not a lot of nuance in that. No. It's blunt force trauma to the head. And it just, you get so demoralized, not just with, like, I run a Donkey Kong, social media account, and I'm demoralized because everybody's demoralized, but you get demoralized by the world around you. And it's hard when your hobby, is not a refuge from that world.
And is just sort of reflecting everything you already don't like about it.
Yeah. So, anyway, don't despair, Thomas. I think you're doing great work, and we all kind of fall into the abyss from time to time. And you pulled yourself out, and you know, we're all gonna get there together. One way or another.
Like, totally. It's why I take Twitter breaks. Like, I'll just deactivate my account for a couple of weeks just to get away from it.
Yeah, sometimes I go to tag you and I'm like, where's Josh?
Yeah. And like it, you know, most of the time I really enjoy the time I spend on Twitter. I really enjoy interacting with people, but like sometimes it's just important. It's important for your own sake to be able to get away from it too.
Honestly, like, it's why I don't really read my my feed. Everybody I follow, I'm sorry if it feels like I ignore you on social media. It's because unless I'm directly tagged in something, I probably won't see it, because for my own mental health, I can't. Like there's like, I always check out like Rare and Playtonic and their social media accounts, Nintendo. There are a few of our friends that I'll check out their sites, and then the great thing about like Donkey Kong having a topic on Twitter now that you can just see like all the hot Donkey Kong tweets of the day. I can go through there and I'm like, oh, that's cool, I'll retweet that, you know. But that's basically like, I don't read everything on Twitter because I would go completely mad. But yep, thank you for the call, Thomas. And we have one more call to take, Josh. So why don't we go ahead and play that, give our thoughts, and then wrap it all up, for now at least, on the future of Donkey Kong and why it's always sunny in Donkey Kong Country.
Hey everybody, this is Crusher the Guido here, coming here from the DK Vine forums. Excited for the show on Sunday, and I had a few questions. First one being, do you think the new video game made by EPD Tokyo will be 2D or 3D, okay? And if it is 2D, which is what a lot of the rumors have been saying, what elements do you think that they will take from the Retro series, and what elements do you think they'll be taking from the Rare series? And or will they do something totally different like Jungle Beat? So, with that being said, also from like a lore standpoint, do you guys think that they'll like bring the old DK house back? Will it be Retro's DK house? I'm just trying to in my head imagine what the future of DKC under Nintendo's in-house studio is going to look like. So, thank you guys. This is my first time calling in a long time, so I appreciate it, and looking forward to hearing you talk.
Thank you for the call, Crusher. I don't know.
Thank you, Crusher.
Yeah. Have you heard anything? I don't know.
If you haven't heard anything, I guarantee you I haven't heard anything.
So, I don't know, like 2D, 3D, it could be either one. It could be something in between. I do know that, what was in development once upon a time, from another studio, that was scrapped before it moved internally, was more on the 3D side. Am I supposed to say that? I don't know. But it, I don't know, because that project is not this project, right? And I think having a 3D Kirby game, it doesn't mean anything towards this project, but it shows, they could be venturing into 3D. Maybe they want Donkey Kong to be the premier 2D platforming, brand going forward, and Mario will be in 3D. There's many directions we could go in this, and, it would all just be hypotheticals and speculation, though. I don't have any declarative statements to make from what I've heard, because I haven't heard.
Yeah, I'm very comfortable sharing like hypothetical ideas of what it could be or what I might like to see, but if you're asking like what do you think it will be, I have no way to have an informed opinion on that.
Yeah. As far as like taking from Retro, taking from Rare, I think both. I think whatever we're going to get is going to not be a complete break from what came before, like Jungle Beat, because this is being made more as far as like, well, we can't do that because we're a different team, and we have to be, and this game is going to be so radically different from what came before. We have to be respectful. This game isn't about that. It's about driving Donkey Kong into the future. And I think they're going to be taking elements from everywhere. Maybe not so much Jungle Beat, but I would still hope some Jungle Beat comes along for the ride. I think the fact that so much of Super Nintendo World's Donkey Kong Country expansion is based on the Retro series bodes well for imagery, sure. Like Donkey Kong's Treehouse.
And hey,
Nintendo likes that.
Donkey Kong's Final Smash in Ultimate does call back to Jungle Beat.
Yeah, and K. Rool's Final Smash has Rare's Donkey Kong Island, so I think like you're gonna have some give or take here. Like, well, Nintendo, especially EPD, really likes playing in iconic imagery, right? Peach's Castle, for example, from Mario 64, became the look of Peach's Castle in any permutation going forward. So I think you're going to see probably Rare's Island, because it's classically shaped. Probably Retro's version of the treehouse, because that will be what's in the park. And also it's a little bit more distinctive than what Rare had going on. Although that will live on as the logo for the Nintendo treehouse. But yeah, I think it's going to be a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and a whole lot of new as well.
If there is anything that I can make an informed guess on, I would say that Nintendo's approach, and really the approach of most, mascot platformer series, is that the lore and the look of things is at least somewhat in flux, especially like on sort of like a per game or per era basis. In other words, I don't expect that anything is going to come out that directly contradicts anything that we've seen before. Like, you're not going to have, like, for example, Chunky Kong show up and say that he doesn't have a younger brother. That's
right.
As much as I might like that, but like,
oh,
I'm sorry.
You just made the Kitty Kong Twitter account very sad.
I know, we're rivals. I like to think of it as a friendly rivalry. We're both having a good time, I would hope. but like, you know what I'm saying, right? Like, they're going to err on the side of whatever is best for this era and for this game.
Yeah, and I think, like, being Rare era fans where we do care about the lore so much and continuity, it's going to be much looser than it ever was under Rare, but I think it will always work if you kind of squint.
Sure.
And sometimes we'll have to come up with fan wanks. Sometimes we'll have to, massage over the inconsistencies. We've always had to do that. It's always worked out.
Yeah, you had to do that even during the Rare era, and you were so good at it that you would often convince me. Like, I would look back several years later and be like, wait, the Chest of Time wasn't in the manual? What?
Right. Yes.
Like, I would just take your version of events as being like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
That's, I think, an effective bit of fan continuity is always something that plausibly feels like it could be true. Maybe prosthetic golfing fingers is a bridge too far for some people, but it's at least an elegant solution that is applicable to the game where it was introduced. Yes. So anyway, it's fun. It's fun. If we didn't have to fan wank things, then I'm afraid that I wouldn't have any relevancy to this anymore. So like it's been hard, especially with something like Sea of Thieves or Ukulele, where Rare and Playtonic, they know their fans so well at this point that they're already on top of everything, and they've got all the details worked out because they know so like I haven't had to fan wank anything for those properties, and it's been a little disconcerting. So it'll be nice to be able to flex that muscle a bit more, give it a bit of a workout again.
Yeah, but stuff.
You're not going to get everything you want, and this is not going to be returned to the Rare era, but it's going to be the best I think we've had since the Rare era. We're going to see characters we haven't seen in a long time. There's going to be this greater potential for the future. And that's the important thing too. It's not just they're working on a new game. It's what comes after the new game. It's the game after that and the game after that. The potential for sequels and spin-offs even in relatively quick fashion. I think that has been what we've been lacking, because we've said before, like the buyout era, the reason things like King of Swing and Jungle Climber didn't do all that well, besides from like a lack of promotion, was they felt like spin-off titles that were lacking the core title to tie it all together. Jungle Beat was the mainline Donkey Kong game on the GameCube, but too many people viewed it as a spin-off, like they viewed Nuts and Bolts as a spin-off. It didn't feel to the general public like there was a mainline Donkey Kong game in that generation, which is why that generation almost dismisses Donkey Kong by and large, Right. So I think having that core game is important, but especially, are we going to get sequels? Are we going to get spin-offs? Is there that stability that we haven't had since Rare? That is where it really matters, because it doesn't really matter, right, if a specific character doesn't appear in the new game, so long as we know that another game is on the horizon and they could appear there. What made the lack of Enguarde and Tropical Freeze so devastating was that, when's the next Donkey Kong game going to be? When are we going to get Enguarde back? If we couldn't get him back in this game, is he just gone forever?
Right.
So, thank you for the call. Captain Cheesebag in a live stream asked, they're definitely going to have some kind of banana-themed snack in DKC World, though, right? I would hope so. We haven't seen restaurants in a diorama or like food shacks. If Funky's Flying By might sell it, maybe, but I would hope like there would be something in there, like some sort of eatery. I was trying to think like what foods they could have, because sometimes I think about like making a Donkey Kong cookbook. I can't cook, but I think like that would be a fun project, right? A Donkey Kong cookbook. But I'm trying to think like outside of like Donkey Kong's birthday cake, and bananas, which are just a self-contained piece of produce. Like what would you have?
There's the banana milkshake / juice box. Not entirely clear what it is that Dixie Kong drinks in her idol animation.
I always just said that was Mountain Dew.
I think I had a strategy guide that claimed it was a banana milkshake.
Okay.
That's how I always thought of it.
I was like, anti-gravity chocolate? No, that's Conker. They won't go that deep. Yeah. Anyway,
I'm looking
it's
forward
going to be exciting.
Hopefully just like getting to go to Super Nintendo World when this thing opens. I have a friend who lives in Japan and is just always like saying, "Man, you need to come visit. You need to come visit," and that's going to be really great.
Yeah, I would love to visit Japan. I would love to, go to Osaka and just see it, but if I have to wait to Orlando, I have to wait to Orlando. Mm-hmm. It will be surreal to like see what little elements, because I see like Thomas brought this up in his call, like the fear that like the Kremlins won't be mentioned at all in the theme park, and I think there's always potential for stuff to be in there. Like we're not going to see like the Gangplank Galleon, right? Like, but there might be a claptrap. Mm-hmm. It like a claptrap animatronic. There might be somebody dressed as K. Rool walking around. We don't know. Like I think that's going to be what's really fun.
The Mario side of Super Nintendo World is even as it is like teeming with little illusions and Easter eggs and stuff that you might be able to notice if you're looking for it. So yeah, I'm sure this will be very similar.
Yeah, so like just because the diorama focuses on returns and the concept art has some tropical freeze in there, doesn't mean we're not going to get stuff like Ellie. Ellie the elephant was in the diorama, so it shows they're thinking way back. What they incorporate in a fun way. Mm-hmm. So that's really like there's one thing knowing it's coming, but having it announced and then the game over the next 3 years of like, we're going to sneak glimpses of it. What are we going to see? That's going to be really fun. That's going to be a lot of fun. Like little tiny news stories. Every time there's a satellite photograph or somebody can get up from a high vantage point.
That said, I wouldn't expect at this point, I don't know, anything's possible. Don't hold me to this, but I wouldn't expect this new game to be announced this year at this point. I think the September Direct was probably the latest. I don't think this is going to be a Diddy Kong racing situation where this.
Guess what, Josh? Metroid Dread has been delayed till June of next year.
Oh.
You're in, Donkey Kong. Tag, you're it.
Well, if it was following that exactly, then we'd be getting Ridley racing.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think like as far as like the expectation, the timetable for the new game, I don't have anything to say there. COVID, Nintendo still has that COVID message at the beginning of the directs. Mm-hmm. Like, as I said, please understand that COVID is still a thing and it's slowed down game development. The fact that this park was being talked about, Super Nintendo World was being talked about as like launching last year and potentially the Donkey Kong side of things being included in that. And now we're saying 2024 is when we're seeing the Donkey Kong stuff. It just shows how things can be delayed and the game will come when the game comes, when it's ready to be announced. Nintendo's usually very strict these days about not announcing something too ahead of time. They'll do it occasionally, like Metroid Prime 4, and look where it's gotten them.
Yeah.
And they don't want a situation where it just becomes phantomware, where it just becomes this thing that's always on the horizon, but never seen release.
Yeah, Nintendo had a reputation back in the N64 era for announcing games and then delaying them over and over and over again. I think they probably they may have underestimated how much more difficult 3D game development was going to be. And just how many more complexities would go into that. So yeah, I know what you mean. Like these days, for the most part, Nintendo doesn't announce something until it's going to come out within the next year. And often a lot closer than that.
Yeah. So that being said, Josh, let's tie it all up into a nice present that Donkey Kong can find in a key temple and eventually unlock his way to secret seclusion, which in this analogy is the bright future ahead. It's okay. It is okay to feel down about all of this from time to time because we're only human. We're fallible. We're mortal. We're fleshy. We're weak. We're pink on the inside. You know, you tickle us, we'll giggle.
Yeah, okay, yes.
But in the end, we've all got to remember what we've said for the last 3 hours here on this conversation, because this, Donkey Kong, the DKU, the spheres, however you want to define it, this should be your escapism from how terrible the world can be. Yeah, I mean, if this, of all things, is bringing you down in 2021, then you're going to need a second hobby. You're going to need to escape from this one. And who has the time? Who has the time for more than one major hobby? And then, Josh, what happens if your hobby is stamp collecting? And then the internal sabotage of the United States Postal Service then makes you sad. Then you're going to need a third hobby. See what I'm saying here? Make sure that Donkey Kong is bringing you joy. You got to Marie Kondo it. Let Donkey Kong bring you joy, or else you got to keep some distance until they announce a new game.
If Donkey Kong's bringing you down, go watch AEW.
And just think about when Diamond Dallas Page teamed with Carl the Mailman Malone. Oh, now I'm thinking about the mail again.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.